A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. It was the kind of day that drags, one of those afternoons where the sun seems to hang just a little too long in the sky, every tick of the clock echoing through the quiet of my small therapy office, where I usually found solace among my books and wobbly old chairs. After a morning filled with mundane cases, anxiety, a sprinkle of depression, the usual suspects, my final appointment came in the form of a new patient who, unknown to me at the time, would shake the very foundation of my moral compass. When he walked in, I wasn't prepared for the weight of his presence. He was stooped but imposing, a heaviness about him that seemed to suppress the air. He introduced himself as Victor, and I could tell from his accent that he was not from around here. I later learned he was from a war-torn country far removed from my well-insulated suburban existence. At first glance, he appeared like any patient, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of nightmares and shadows. He sat in the chair across from me, those haunted eyes narrowing even further when I caught a glimpse of the scars, physical and otherwise, etched into his skin. "You have to promise not to judge," he said, a quiver in his voice revealing a hint of vulnerability. "I'm not who you think I am." It was an invitation and a warning, as if reality were temporarily suspended, and I found myself leaning forward, curious. As the session unfolded, Victor let slip snippets of his life, recounting tales of violence and chaos that would make a horror movie pale in comparison. He spoke of choices, of battles fought not only against enemies but against his own conscience, and I was struck by the absurdity of it all. I was confiding in a war criminal, a man culpable of atrocities I read about in history books. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on me. What constitutes a person? Should I extend him the compassion I offered all my patients, or could he be irredeemable? As the weeks dragged on, I grew attached to Victor in ways I never anticipated. Each session grew increasingly intimate, laden with discussions of guilt, human nature, and the cyclical nature of violence. He was both a monster and a man seeking redemption. I began to find beauty in his tragic story, bewildered by how he reflected my own fears back at me. Maybe I wasn't just a therapist healing others but a fragile human being grasping for connection in a world teeming with horror. But one fateful afternoon, everything shifted. As he spoke of his past, of time spent wondering whose lives he had claimed in the name of war, a phone call interrupted our session. I instinctively picked up, only to hear a voice crackling on the other end. "We know who he is. He's a wanted man." My heart stammered. The confrontation of my unspoken fears had arrived at my doorstep. Shame surged through me for even allowing myself to feel sympathy for him. The line between right and wrong blurred starkly in that moment, and I widely opened my eyes, desperately searching for some illumination within Victor's steady gaze. "Do you know what you're doing?" I asked him, an accusatory whisper escaping my lips. To my shock, he smiled softly, an expression of understanding and serene acceptance. "I'm trying to come home," he replied, words heavy with implication. In that moment, I realized I had not just been his therapist but a kindred spirit. We sat in silence, a suffocating tension enveloping us as I battled with my professional duty against an unsettling sense of betrayal by my own empathy. When the session ended, my heart remained heavy, complicated, and confused. I didn't actually care. Who had he been before? The person who sat across from me was alive, vulnerable, and paradoxically engrossing. The lines we often draw based on societal norms began to dissolve like sugar in warm water, leaving me disoriented yet intrigued, just wishing for clarity that never arrived. Weeks passed, and I knew I was facing a crossroads. I had to decide, continue treating him and risk my own conscience, or sever ties altogether, never allowing the flicker of his humanity to shimmer in my mind again. In the end, I chose to continue our sessions, not because I believed he deserved forgiveness, but because, admittedly, I reveled in the complexity of his existence. I was learning about the human condition in its rawest form. The Psychiatric Association's guidelines, the law, my own moral compass, they all paled against the tapestry of human life I was slowly unraveling. I had not abandoned my ethics but instead had discovered a deeper narrative woven into Victor's story, one that transcended mere black and white thinking. I drifted further into this uncharted territory, committing myself to this man's journey toward redemption, even if it meant grappling with my own shadows along the way. For now, we would wade through the murky waters together, pieces of history intertwined, until clarity illuminated the darkness, if it ever would. Months later, I still found myself reflecting on that initial encounter, how I'd crossed paths with a war criminal who, while undeniably flawed, taught me a profound lesson in humanity. In the end, perhaps without the spark of madness that ignited this unlikely connection, healing could not have truly begun. As I continued my therapy practice, I found comfort in knowing that sometimes understanding rises from the ashes of the past, and the courage to face those shadows becomes a beautiful journey all on its own. As the months continued to unfold, I settled back into the rhythm of my therapy practice, letting the echoes of that initial encounter quiet down, but they never fully dissipated. The ember of our shared experience remained, quietly glowing in the recesses of my mind. My days were usually filled with the mundane yet gratifying tasks of helping others navigate their own turmoil, ordinary sessions punctuated by the lilting sounds of laughter or the occasional sob spilling forth beneath my watchful, empathetic gaze. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally grapple with the strange weight of what I learned from my time with him, the man who carried remnants of war upon his shoulders, whose very name echoed like thunder in the stillness of moral conversation. We had exchanged stories that clung to the air between us, tough tales mottled with blood, but juxtaposed by his stark vulnerability. There was a surreal paradox in the way he navigated his undying guilt, the burden of lives lost and the iron chains of memory that clanked heavily in the quiet confines of our sessions. I knew, deep down, that some might balk at the very concept of treating such a soul. Disillusioned by my commitment, they would see this as a grave misstep driven by an overzealous idealism that turned a blind eye to the darker shades of morality. But for me, it evolved into a personal pilgrimage, peeling away layers to uncover something both terrifying and exquisite hidden within the human experience. Despite his history, I felt a task far greater than indictment rested upon my shoulders. It was about bridges and understanding, and the ache of recognizing that every antagonist could very well be a protagonist spun into the wrong story. The sun dipped low over the horizon in a golden farewell most evenings as I closed up shop, and each time I brushed past that creaky door, my thoughts would inevitably drift to him. That connection had shaped every earnest "how are you feeling?" and the gentle nudges toward progress I offered my clients. His haunting presence was like a ghost that had woven itself into the fabric of my life, an uninvited friend who refused to leave. Then came the day when he slipped back into my life, almost effortlessly, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. The clinic's phone rang with an urgency that promptly shattered my thoughts. I answered, only to hear his gravelly voice across the line, the kind that had once stuttered halting truths, now noticeably aged, echoing with fatigue. "I need to talk again," he said, a tremor in his tone, laden with either desperation or hope, perhaps both. My heart sank at the unease lining his words, a reminder of vulnerability sharper than glass. "Of course," I replied, a practiced calm enveloping my own bubbling uncertainty. "When would you like to come in?" We arranged for the next day, and as I hung up, the familiar anticipation flooded my veins, tangled with strands of anxiety. Despite all he'd shared, I wondered just how far the edges of his redemption could stretch. He arrived the following afternoon, a spectral sight clad in shadows and what felt like an ocean of burdens. We exchanged muted greetings, the weight of past sessions settling around us like an oppressive fog. I offered him a seat, the worn fabric whispering against the chair as he sank into it. His eyes were tired but kept alert, deeply searching as if willing me to see the fragments of a man who had been stripped down to the core. "I can't shake it," he admitted, his voice a raw whisper that sliced through the air. "The faces, the screams, they're all still there. I thought talking would help, but..." His words trailed off, leaving a palpable silence that bloomed between us. It felt familiar, each rhythm of his voice resonating with the resonance of our prior discussions, yet the frailness of his current state drew a stark contrast against the usually firm man before me. "I need a reason to keep going," he finally confessed, his anguish laid bare. It dawned on me then, the forgiveness he sought wasn't merely for himself, it was for the world outside, a world that had spun on without acknowledging the depths of his plight. I paused, crafting my words as carefully as a sculptor chiseling a marble block. "You've been through an unimaginable experience, and it's okay to grieve what you've lost, including parts of yourself." Encouragement was met with a deluge of bottled experiences spilling forth. He spoke of harrowing nights haunted by memories of despair and fleeting moments of humanity amid the devastation. It was an outpouring that spilled out over the juxtaposition of life and death, a hammer striking an already fragile heart. I listened closely, offering comfort and space for him to release his burdens. As he shared, I realized that my mere presence was creating a safe sanctuary for his pain. And in return, he was handing me insights into the complexity of humanity, the darkness intertwined with light, the monster wrapped in flesh yearning for understanding. The session meandered along the delicate threads of healing, and when it ended, a smile tugged at my lips. In that moment, what we found was shared resilience, a pact of empathy forged anew. As he walked out, lighter than when he entered. I felt our connection soothe my spirit. Outside my window, the sun dipped below the jagged edges of the horizon, casting everything in a glow that felt almost like fresh beginnings. Somehow, we had salvaged something vibrant from the depths, two souls crafted in fire, sharing an understanding that transcended mere shame or vilification. I knew then, in the ebbs and flows of life, we all carry shadows, but it's how we embrace the light that becomes the heartbeat of our stories. Months would pass again, but this wound would no longer press against the fabric of my soul. It was simply a reminder that healing takes many forms, and sometimes the bravest act one can perform is choosing to understand. It was early morning when I received the call that stirred distant memories, pulling me back into the realm of what had once felt like a fever dream. The familiar tone of my office phone cut through the stillness, echoing in the small, softly lit space where I often found respite among the flood of paperwork and therapy notes. The voice on the other end introduced itself as someone from the local clinic. A quick review of my ongoing cases had flagged some lingering concerns regarding one particular patient, Roberto. His name alone conjured an inexplicable mix of emotions. The bond we had forged itched at the edges of my consciousness, reminding me of the chaotic intersection of darkness and light that had forever changed how I viewed suffering and redemption. The directive was straightforward: I must assess his mental state again, as his behavior had begun to spiral back into the shadows. Soft murmurs of concern flared as I listened to the details, words like inappropriate outbursts and intense expressiveness wrapping themselves around the narrative of a man who had once been untouchable in my office, an enigma I had been compelled to understand. A part of me, however reluctant, was ready for this renewed confrontation. I held tightly to the memory of those long sessions where we navigated the raw, jagged edges of each other's truths, his tales of war, chillingly layered with nuance, and my responses, steeped in empathy, attempting to thaw the frozen armor he had forged through a lifetime of conflict. I could still picture him leaning forward, almost animated at times, as he recounted snippets from his past, the smell of distant gunfire, the weight of choices that even fate could not preordain. What had once felt like a burden to sift through now shimmered with the fervor of transformation, reshaping how healing could truly take form. I wondered if I could be his guide again, helping him inch back toward the flickering warmth we had discovered together. When I arrived at the small clinic, the air was heavy with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and unshakable tension. The waiting area felt eerily tranquil, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above as anxious patients clung to the pages of dog-eared self-help books. Roberto sat in the far corner, casting an imperceptible shadow against the walls painted in pastel blues, his hands tight around the frayed edges of his sleeves. Those familiar dark circles encircling his eyes told stories of sleepless nights, of memories refusing to fade. Our eyes met, and within that glance lay everything we had shared, the traumatic echoes of his past and the promise of exploration yet to come. The minute I took my seat across from him, the weight of those shared shadows enveloped us again, as immovable as the gravity of unspoken regret. "Are you all right?" I ventured, noting the slight tremor in his clenched fists. He drew a breath, deeply rooted in unease but tinged with resolve, a mix I had grown to recognize in our sessions. "Sometimes the past just doesn't want to stay behind," he replied, his voice gravelly yet strikingly sweet, like a stone plunged into murky waters, creating ripples of reflection. What followed encapsulated moments that were equal parts heartbreaking and enlightening. Stories tumbled out in jagged snippets, each revealing how the weight of his horrific choices felt heavier still in the light of accountability. As I listened, flashes of recognition flickered within me. All of us, in our own ways, were at war with ourselves, battling regret or shame, yet yearning for connection, a bridge between fractured histories and hope. With each session, I cherished the clarity that arose from our encounters, the understanding that slowly morphed from fear into acceptance, both for Roberto and myself. We weren't separate entities, we were interwoven vessels of experience navigating the escalating tide of emotions that threatened to drown us. He spoke of nights he couldn't close his eyes, of whispered faces that haunted him in fleeting dreams, yet with each confession, a pinprick of healing emerged, connecting us through shared vulnerability. One session melted into another, until bizarrely, the notion of guilt transformed into a raw, electrifying energy, less of an anchor and more of a compass guiding him toward understanding himself, even when he didn't completely believe the journey was justifiable. Months turned into a captivating rhythm of sessions, laden with profound exchanges of love, pain, and redemption. It became clear that he was beginning to redefine his narrative, weaving threads that had only previously been tainted in despair. Finding strength in the light, he learned to speak the truth while bearing that heavy weight, Each session felt like we were peeling back layers of a deeply rooted yet beautiful tapestry. I, too, was unearthing pieces of my own self in the process, questions of morality and humanity grappling within my mind, forging renewed perspectives while allowing empathy to flourish like newfound blossoms in early spring. The day he smiled, truly smiled, was etched like magic in my memory. I want to be better. His words fell like gentle raindrops on parched soil, nourishing the parts of him still yearning for acceptance. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride, for here was a warrior unarmed, wrestling the ghosts of a haunting past. Understanding no longer shackled him but inspired him instead. Yet, just when tranquility seemed to blanket our sessions, whispers of unrest emerged from the clinic, echoing through the hallways about a potential release for Roberto. I found myself at a crossroads, battling anxiety as the thought of him re-entering society and grappling with a world reluctant to embrace those who'd once held the weight of war upon their shoulders tugged at my heartstrings. What if this journey of healing, still so raw, was to be disrupted by a society unwilling to forgive? Each day turned into a nebulous haze where hope and dread revealed themselves as two sides of the same coin. I sought solace in my memories of our progress, yet uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud overhead. When the day finally arrived, and the clinic called me in for one last session before his departure, the room felt electric with unspoken farewells. Roberto emerged quietly, almost reverently, his eyes reflecting an agonizing blend of gratitude and apprehension. As we exchanged the final words, a small part of me clung to the idea that I might see him again, managing to insist on finding connection amid the chaos, willing to embrace the discomfort of disparity. As he stood to leave, our eyes met once more, and I could see it, the light flickering in the depths of his gaze, the will to carry the lessons we had unearthed in the sacred space we'd nurtured. No matter where you go, just remember to seek understanding, I said softly. Theirs was both familiar and alien, intricate tapestries made from war and healing, woven together. Months later, the world beyond the clinic hummed with its relentless rhythm, and I reveled in the quiet strength that silently fortified my practice and life. Healing is indeed a labyrinth, I mused, entwined within shadows and light, and as I reflected on the journey, I realized that sometimes the most painful paths illuminate truths long buried, waiting to re-emerge, the enduring truth that every heart holds the universe of battles fought and emotions shared. Perhaps the real journey lay not solely in the act of healing but in the unwavering spirit that rises, ready to embrace love and connection, even in the wake of madness. It started as a typical Tuesday morning for me, the usual gray light filtering through the half-drawn curtains and the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. I shuffled into the dim kitchen, coffee brewing, thoughts racing ahead of me like they often do. I was just 2 weeks into my new job as a healthcare data analyst, and despite the monotonous tasks, I found myself strangely excited, like this was my first little step into a big, adult world. I had been vying for this position ever since I graduated, earning my degree with the hopes of making a real impact in the world of health services. My enthusiasm, however, took a strange twist when I received a call from my boss that day. He told me there had been a mix-up with patient records at a nearby clinic and that I would need to come in at the end of the day to help fix it. As someone who had always valued personal privacy and the importance of confidentiality, I was unsettled. The notion of accessing sensitive patient files made me shiver, but I shook off the discomfort, reminding myself this was part of my job. Fast forward to the evening, and I entered the clinic, feeling a knot in my stomach. The fluorescent lights above buzzed ominously as I was introduced to the IT team and pointed toward a small room cluttered with outdated computers. That's when I encountered her, Melissa, a nurse who seemed to embody calm in the storm of disarray surrounding us. As we sat together trying to untangle the mess, I tried to keep things lighthearted, joking about the nature of paperwork and technology, but she quickly quieted. "Just remember, HIPAA violations are serious," she said, her voice low and slightly unsteady. That warning took root in my mind, not because I was making any potential mistake but because I sensed something deeper in her tone, a burden she carried. I pressed her about it gently. "You seem stressed, Melissa. Is there something I should know?" She sighed, glancing at the door. "It's not about the patients who've already seen their records. It's about a new patient. You won't believe what happened." I felt a chill run through me as she recounted the tale. A patient, a woman named Sarah, had shown up mysteriously at the clinic requesting her records but had no identity. Melissa said Sarah wore odd clothing, spoke in riddles, and had an unsettling gaze that left the staff feeling watched. I could almost see the tension in her shoulders lighten as she spoke, a shared fear between us. It turned the mundane task of analyzing data into something almost mystical. Hours passed, and we were deep into a discussion of privacy, ethics, and the essence of patient identity when a sharp knock on the door jolted me upright. A man, disheveled and panting, burst in. "You found her, right? You have to find her," he yelled. The room fell silent before I collected my thoughts. Confusion swirled around us. Melissa ushered him outside, but I could hear a harried discussion happening just beyond the walls. It felt like an eruption that I was not meant to witness. When they returned, tension wound tighter than a coiled spring. The man explained, "Sarah is not who she says she is. She doesn't have a history in our files. It's like she's a ghost." He looked feverish, as though he had been chasing shadows. My heart raced. Was the woman we were trying to help someone trapped in a web of secrets? Or was she a danger, cloaked in anonymity? I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me, but curiosity tugged at my senses too. "What does she want?" I finally asked. The man's eyes darted, fear shadowing his breath. "She wants answers. She thinks someone is after her." We were thrown into chaos. As Melissa and I resumed our tasks, I could feel my pulse quicken at every intimate detail. Data entries felt like interrogations as I plotted course after course through our systems, trying to piece together the answers to the enigma concealed within our sterile walls. The weight of records heavier than I'd anticipated hung over me. I replayed our conversation about HIPAA over and over, ensuring I was not crossing lines I didn't intend to cross, while my mind tangled with each unexplained piece of information. It became an obsession. How could a woman simply not exist? As the sun fell further, shadows began to stretch along the walls, the clinic growing quieter. Eventually, Melissa and I navigated deeper into the records, sensing a shift of urgency as we worked to uncover the truth. When we finally hit pay dirt, an old record buried so deep that no one had bothered to check, it felt like winning a race against the clock. Her name popped up alongside a series of previous appointments and a disconcerting note that detailed an anomalous transfer between facilities. Melissa smiled with relief, but I couldn't shake the discomfort settling over me. I expected every moment to slip into the realm of horror, fearing it might spiral out of control. As we walked the records to our supervisor, I felt a strange pull back toward Sarah, like she was a part of me now. What came next was surprising. Melissa and I both had to face frustrating bureaucracy and laws, trying to make sense of Sarah's identity, the paperwork spinning us around in knots of red tape. Each phone call became a trial, testing the limits of propriety and patience until I was left wondering if we would ever resolve the chaos that had enveloped us. As the clock struck midnight, a decision had to be made, to keep looking and risk breaking rules or accept what we discovered and move on. Taking a breath, I opted for honesty. We approached our supervisor and bared the whole situation, feeling the weight of truth lifting us slightly. What followed were some tense moments I will never forget. My heart raced as the supervisor scrutinized our findings, and I held my breath, praying we hadn't ventured too far. In that moment of clarity, I understood the gravity of our roles, the essence of humanity fused into every record, and how vital it was to respect these lives woven together through the healthcare system. As for Sarah, the answer came swiftly. The right personnel followed up, though I never learned what fate awaited her. I left the clinic that night exhausted yet relieved, acutely aware that the thrill of ethereal mystery and the deeply rooted seriousness of caring for patient identity often clash in the world of healthcare. Months passed after that fateful evening, and the experience began to fade into a soft recollection, just another tale tucked into my mind, woven among the many threads of my career. Then, one quiet Sunday afternoon, I received a familiar message. It was Melissa. "Hey," it read, "you won't believe what I've just found out about Sarah." Curiosity surged through me, and as I read, I couldn't help but wonder if I hadn't just become part of the story of someone who had carved their existence between identities. Just like that, I realized, sometimes those we think are lost may hold secrets worth keeping, and our paths cross not by mere chance, but by a shared understanding of who we are beneath the masks we wear. And so I relayed back, "Tell me everything." Melissa's response came swiftly, like a whisper caught on the wind, full of urgency and intrigue. "I was going through some old social media posts, and it appears Sarah's been leading a double life. Did you know she used to work in a psychiatric hospital? She posted about her experiences under a pseudonym, and there are some pretty intense revelations in there. You should see the comments she gets, people sharing their struggles, their fears, and tying them into her stories in ways that are surprisingly insightful." A chill ran through me. I had known Sarah only as the soft-spoken woman with a penchant for vintage books and herbal teas, never as someone who had grappled with the complexities of mental health in a professional setting. "Do you think she's still in touch with anyone from there?" I texted, my mind racing with a river of thoughts. Would knowing more about her spark some deeper connection? Or was this merely stumbling onto territory better left alone? Melissa replied in a way that made me think she had kicked her own thoughts around, too. Well, I didn't dig that deep, but she mentioned a case in one of her posts. It was cryptically fascinating. You could check if any of her old colleagues are still around. The notion struck me hard. What if this case was pivotal, not only to Sarah's past but perhaps intertwined with her reasons for stepping back from society? Instinctively, I felt a wave of empathy wash over me mixed with a hint of dread. I couldn't help but picture Sarah, clocking in day after day, carrying the weight of another person's pain, while she herself might have been drowning in her own struggles. The next day was a haze of mixed emotions, curiosity mixed with caution. Somewhere within me, a voice cautioned against delving too deep, reminding me of my role as the friend of the storyteller, not the investigator. But I felt that I couldn't just let this mystery slip through my fingers. Before I knew it, I began my search, tracking down various forums where ex-employees shared their experiences. Each thread unraveled new layers, pieces of a puzzle that felt achingly familiar. Eventually, I stumbled across a name that stood out: Dr. Hargrove, Sarah's former supervisor. The reviews of her were a mix of reverence and caution, as people praised her for her intuition but also warned of her unwavering intensity. Feeling daring, I reached out to Dr. Hargrove via LinkedIn, but the message sat unanswered for weeks as I tried to balance my fascination with an uneasy sense that I was intruding on something far more personal than I could understand. Then, almost unexpectedly, the notification popped up, a quick blip that sent adrenaline coursing through me as I read Dr. Hargrove's reply. Let's discuss. How did you come to know Sarah? I paused, contemplating how to respond, businesslike, or friendly and casual, but in the end, emotion tugged at me. I filled my response with the truth, how Sarah had become dear to me over our conversations, artfully circumventing the eerie nature of my inquiry. Soon, we arranged a call. As we spoke, Dr. Hargrove shared fragmented tales of Sarah's time in the ward, illuminating flashes of bravery amidst darker times, illuminating how she had been a fierce advocate for her patients' rights. It felt like I was sitting on a springboard, ready to leap into the unknown depths of Sarah's past, and yet I could hardly breathe as she detailed an incident with a patient that almost garnished Sarah both admiration and ire within the hospital community. She pushed boundaries in ways that rattled some of the staff, the doctor described, her voice steady yet tinged with endearment. She believed in radical empathy, often becoming too emotionally involved in her cases. It led to a very critical incident that forced her to reevaluate her place in the world. My heart raced at the weight of her words. I realized that Sarah held stories that might shatter what I thought I knew of her. They were pieces of her soul woven into those moments, and whether she shared them freely or kept them locked away, they remained an inseparable part of her journey. As the call ended, a lingering question hung in the air: was this knowledge something I should reveal to her, or would it expose vulnerabilities that Sarah had worked hard to conceal? In the following days, my heart grew heavier, crafting narratives in my mind where revealing this truth brought only pain. One night, unable to sleep, I took the plunge. I texted her, my fingers trembling over the screen. "Hey, can we talk? I found out some things about your past." Silence enveloped the air, thick and awkward as I stared at my phone, half hoping for a reply but equally dreading it. When her response finally came, it read simply, "About what?" My pulse quickened. She had a right to know that her reflections had inspired earthquakes in someone else's life. I told her everything, all at once, my heart racing, projecting my excitement while fearing the abrupt end of our connection. It was futile to deny, she was a storyteller in every sense. But Sarah's reply was slower this time, each dot cueing a new pang of anxiety within me. The chat fizzled out, leaving a stuttered beat of anticipation hanging thick in the air. With each passing minute, I replayed every detail, how brave she had been, how compassionate her words were, yet I feared for the memories that the shadows carved into her spirit, one she may not wish to confront. When she finally typed, "I didn't think anyone would ever ask me about that. It has been a while," I felt a tidal wave of relief rush through me. I stepped carefully, acknowledging the fragility housed in her revelation while also wanting to encourage her to share more. We spent hours on the phone after that, her words weaving a tapestry of pain and hope in ways I had never imagined before. I finally grasped the depth of her character. She wasn't lost between the stories and identities, she was the sum of them, an intricate web of experiences that continued to shape her. When our call finished, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, longing to draw her out of the shell that had quietly encased her. It became evident, sometimes, Behind the closed doors of old memories, lies a path to healing, a beckoning for both of us to remind ourselves who we were beyond the masks we created. As the days turned into weeks, we exchanged messages more freely now, her guarded tone melting into something friendly and real. And I wondered, in passing, about what stories I too held tightly behind my own facade, cherished fragments that might intertwine with hers. Perhaps we both shared the weight of pasts and secrets, each of us learning to navigate our truths together, a quiet understanding that some journeys are meant to be shared. And so, in this tangled dance of revelations, Melissa's message came to echo within me. Sometimes those we think are lost hold secrets worth keeping, and who knows? Perhaps in every hidden truth lies the potential for connection greater than we could ever envision. Melissa's response was instant, a flurry of text that felt both electric and weighty. "You know Sarah, right? She worked at that clinic a few months back, the one where you used to go for therapy?" I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see me. The memories of that clinic were still vivid, the sterile smell of antiseptic mingling with the faint scent of lavender that the receptionist sprinkled in the air. Sarah had been warm, a gentle presence amidst the cold sterility of mental health care. "Well," Melissa continued, "she's been let go. They said it was for violating protocol, but there's more to it." At that moment, curiosity twisted in my gut. Sarah had always seemed so careful, so attuned to the patient's needs. What did she do? I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly as I awaited Melissa's reply. "I ran into her at the bar a week ago," Melissa wrote slowly, "and she was different. More erratic. She mentioned something about patient files, but she didn't elaborate. I think she might have been researching something she shouldn't have. And you know what's wild? She was asking about you." My heart skipped a beat. Why would Sarah be looking into me? Was she worried, or was it something deeper? The butterflies in my stomach fluttered violently as I recalled my last session with Sarah. She'd seemed concerned when I mentioned dreams that felt too real and haunting moments that clung to me like shadows. Was my own world now somehow threading into Sarah's unraveling tale? I let the questions linger as I replied, "What do you mean, asking about me? What did she say?" The pause felt interminable, each second stretching into infinity as I held my breath. Finally, Melissa's words came trickling through, laden with weight. "She seemed concerned about your last diagnosis. She mentioned she was worried you were in more danger than you realized." I felt a chill creep up my spine. My mind raced back to those countless times I had poured my heart into therapy, the honest exchanges that had found a home in Sarah's understanding gaze. Had I inadvertently exposed some hidden secret of my own? The idea that I might be a part of a story much larger than my own made me uneasy. I typed, "Danger? How? I don't understand." But before Melissa could respond, a flood of memories surged within me, the names, the diagnoses, the whispers of HIPAA that seemed to echo through the hallways of every psychiatric facility I had ever stepped foot in. Suddenly, I recalled my own feelings of being trapped, seen yet unseen, always an open book to those with the power to scribble in my pages. In that moment of reflection, I began to wonder if Sarah had realized that perhaps I was more than just another patient, more than just a series of symptoms and treatment plans drafted in the dim light of a therapist's office. Maybe I too had secrets worth sharing, though I had built my own wall to protect them. My thoughts spiraled again as Melissa's follow-up came. "She wanted me to find you and tell you this. She thinks you need to see her, to understand something she uncovered." My mind reeled. Was it reckless to consider meeting with someone who had been fired, someone on the fringes of this clinical world? Yet, a part of me felt the pull towards Sarah, an anchor that called out through the disarray of my thoughts. Maybe she held the key to understanding those hidden fragments of myself I had kept so tightly wrapped. "Where can I find her?" I found myself typing without thought. Melissa replied almost immediately, "I can give you her address, but I don't feel good about this, you know? Be careful." That care rang like a distant bell against the backdrop of my apprehension, and I found comfort in it, a reminder that I wasn't truly alone in this moment. As I read the address, a sense of determination washed over me, mingling with the anxiety that had taken residence in my chest. I could investigate my own narrative. Perhaps, like Sarah, I had been woven into a larger fabric of existence, one that danced between known truths and hidden realities. And so, with every heartbeat echoing my pulsing thoughts, I made up my mind. I needed to meet Sarah, to forge a connection that could shed light on her mysteries and perhaps my own. The sun dipped low in the sky as I prepared myself for the encounter. I felt the shapes of the shadows outside elongate, stretching toward the horizon, much like the threads of fate pulling us together. As I drove toward her address, the scenery blurred by, each mile marked with a question, a longing, an eagerness to embrace whatever awaited me. My mind buzzed like a hive, each curiosity a little bee searching for a flower, unsure of the nectar hidden within. Would I find answers to my own buried truths, or would I unravel the deeper meanings behind Sarah's journey? I parked outside a modest apartment complex that looked both inviting and intimidating, and as I stepped out of the car, a strange calm settled over me, settling the racing thoughts tumbling like jumbled leaves in the wind. I approached her door and raised my hand to knock, my pulse quickening as I fought the urge to turn back. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I knocked. Each sound echoed like a heartbeat against the wood. I stood there, waiting, breath held. It felt as though the world had condensed into this moment. A few moments passed before the door creaked open, revealing Sarah's familiar face, though it seemed altered, marked by worry and disarray. Her eyes flickered with recognition and a hint of relief, as if she had been bracing herself for this moment. "You came," she said softly, and just like that, I stepped over the threshold, into her story, our stories united, as curiosity whispered infinite possibilities of truths yet to be revealed. And as I crossed into her living space, amidst the clutter of papers, stray books on mental health, and empty coffee cups, that sense of connection blossomed, cradled in the realization that perhaps every secret worth keeping leads us not just into shadows, but toward the light of understanding ourselves and one another. I've always found solace in the rhythmic clinking of my crochet hook against the yarn, a form of therapy that allows my mind to drift, cradled in creativity. For the last 5 years, this has been my escape, a little world where I could weave warmth into blankets and gifts for friends and family. When my friend Lucy told me she was expecting her first child, I knew I had to create something special for her, a unique, hand-crocheted blanket that would not only keep the baby warm but also carry the love of a friend. I spent countless evenings after work curating the perfect yarn, deep greens and soft browns, envisioning the joy it would bring. Once the blanket was completed, its imperfections felt like the very essence of handmade art. Each stitch told the tale of my meticulous attention and love. But then, right before the baby shower, panic emerged as I realized I had made a small but glaring error, a stitch pattern inconsistency that not only hurt my eyes but felt like a betrayal of my craft. Refusing to allow this flaw to grab hold, I dismissed it, telling myself Lucy wouldn't care, that the blanket was more about intention and love than precision. However, when I presented it at the shower, she looked puzzled at first, and then disappointed. "Did you mean for it to be like this?" she asked gently, and the warmth in my chest began to cool as I mumbled a half-hearted excuse about it being an artistic choice, wishing for her to be enchanted rather than concerned. The laughter around us felt heavier now, and it was like the moment stretched as I noticed her glancing at that one lopsided corner, her fingers running along the stitches. It all spiraled when, prompted by her mother's insistent critique about blending techniques, I heard Lucy whisper, "Maybe it would just be better if you fixed it." A sudden wave of confusion rushed over me. Fix it? This was my creation. The very idea of unraveling hours of work started to feel like an imposition on the heart behind the stitches. I nodded, my throat tight, and made a decision that felt heavy and liberating at once. I politely reclaimed the blanket that evening, stating that I'd prefer to have it a little longer to perfect it. The room fell silent, as if I had just declared a national emergency. I felt a sinking feeling wash over me. Was I being unreasonable? I distanced myself from the party, a dryness in my throat as I left with my imperfect creation clutched to my chest, hiding my face in its soft fibers. In those moments alone, I grappled with guilt spiraling into indignation. How could anyone expect me to compromise my art, even for love? Yet, the evening left a lingering taste of regret, a sadness threading through my heart like thin strands of yarn unraveling. Days went by with the blanket set aside, untouched, as I continued my needlework but felt the crack in our friendship widening whenever her name surfaced in conversations. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of avoidance, I decided to reach out, sending her a message to discuss my feelings, trying to be open but also tucked away in my vulnerability. Her reply was surprisingly warm, filled with understanding. She confessed to feeling guilty for criticizing something I poured my heart into, and suddenly, I felt the fog clear. I wasn't the only one affected by this moment. We talked it through, weaving our misunderstandings together like a tapestry until it formed something new. I promised to fix the blanket, relaying that my imperfections were a reflection of growth, a lesson in every stitch rather than a product of shame. In the end, I brought back a completed but refined blanket, complete with a note that simply read, "Made with love, flaws and all." She hugged me tightly and smiled through grateful tears, and as I stood there tucked into that moment, I realized the beauty of this journey wasn't just in the work I created but in the connections it fostered, the acceptance of imperfections shared like patched up seams. So here I am, reflecting not just on crochet skills but on friendships and growth, recognizing that sometimes, love is not about perfection, it's about the willingness to embrace each other's patterns, oddities and all. Update: just last week, Lucy sent me a picture of her new baby curled up in the very blanket I'd almost thrown away. All the flaws whispered stories of friendship, and as I stared at that little bundle, I felt at peace, not just with the blanket but with the understanding that in each stitch, I'd learned more than I ever expected about love, patience, and acceptance. As I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window, casting warm patterns on the wooden surface, I thought about how much had changed since I first began crocheting that blanket for Lucy. With every stitch, not only was I creating something tangible, but I was also weaving together moments of our friendship, those late-night talks about dreams and fears, those shared giggles over coffee that turned into hours, and the quiet afternoons where we simply existed in each other's company. The blanket had started as a simple gift, a gesture to celebrate her new role as a mother, but it had unintentionally transformed into a metaphor for our relationship, full of quirks, imperfections, and ultimately, love. I recalled the heated conversation we'd had when I hesitated to give it to her, worried about the mistakes I had made in the pattern, as if flaws would somehow taint the essence of what I was offering. Lucy, however, had looked at me with those kind eyes and said, "It's perfect because you made it for me. The errors are part of its charm." I hadn't understood her then, not completely, but as I gazed at her little one, the image of a tiny hand cradled under the colorful blanket, I felt a soft warmth blossoming in my chest. The blanket was not merely fabric, it was a tapestry of shared memories, acceptance, and the realization that none of us is flawless, yet we cherish each other regardless. Each loop and twist in the yarn told a story, reminding me that love isn't about delivering perfection but rather about giving ourselves the space to grow, to sometimes falter, without fear of judgment. As I brewed a cup of chamomile to accompany my thoughts, I mentally revisited those past emotions, the hesitation, the doubt that crept in when Lucy offered to overlook my mistakes. I had grappled with feelings of inadequacy, wondering if my creations would ever be worthy of her and the new life she was nurturing. Yet as I watched that photo again, I felt a gentle shift within myself. Suddenly, I was filled with a sense of gratitude for the journey we had taken together, for the lessons learned within the tight stitches of a yarn life spun with care and friendship. I allowed myself the grace to feel fondness for the little imperfections I once so criticized, realizing they were stepping stones on this path of understanding and compassion. As I finished my tea and looked back at the wonderfully imperfect blanket wrapped around Lucy's baby, I knew I would carry this lesson with me as life continued to weave its intricate patterns, unafraid of the deliberate messiness that makes us who we are. And now, this blanket, much like our friendship, would serve as a constant reminder that sometimes, the most beautiful creations emerge from embracing the flaws instead of hiding from them. As the evening settled, saturating my living room with a warm, golden hue, I found myself getting lost in memories that had woven together my experience with crochet and friendship. I had picked up the crochet hook years ago as a way to foster a creative outlet while grappling with the stress of my then demanding job. Each pull of yarn through the loop felt meditative, allowing me to escape into a world where each creation existed solely through my hands. And though the projects came to life, imperfectly at times, they were birthed from my heart. I could remember the first blanket I ever made, a cacophony of colors that I thought would all blend beautifully but instead clashed with a jarring audacity. I loved it nonetheless, not for its elegance but for the hours I spent knotting together both yarn and my dreams. However, with Lucy, it was different. She had filled that blanket with stories, laughter, and momentary tears, making it tangible with memories that stretched beyond physical time. Sipping the last remnants of my tea, I allowed myself to linger on the importance of those little imperfections. I could feel now how they mirrored our evolving friendship, two uncertain souls, navigating life's unpredictable waters, sometimes taking a wrong turn but always finding their way back to one another. The moment I had taken back the blanket after Lucy first expressed disappointment was unsettling, a moment where I was too caught in my own expectations to recognize her embrace of the flaws. The night had been tense as we circled around our unspoken words until, finally, I decided to reclaim the wayward stitches, wrapping that crochet into the fabric of my being. Yet, now, reflecting on that very same blanket brought me serenity. Each crooked line symbolized the hurdles we had faced, the miscommunications and reconciliations that had stitched our hearts closer. And as the tranquility of the night seeped into my thoughts, I opened my phone to the picture Lucy had sent. There was the soft, serene image of her baby, wrapped snugly in the blanket, that patchwork of color cradling her little one as they drifted into sleep. At that moment, those carefully crafted imperfections were stripped of their criticism. They told a story, a narrative of love instilled and nurtured. Amidst the chaotic threads of our lives, I realized we were meant to be a bit messy, unexpectedly colorful, intertwining like yarn in a basket. My heart swelled, filled with gratitude and recognizing the gentle waves of forgiveness that wash over us in times of doubt. I had not solely crocheted a blanket, I had crocheted a legacy of acceptance, a reminder that our struggles shape us and that friendships thrive in their honesty. I tucked the memory away for the future, promising myself to carry this lesson onwards, emboldened to embrace life's delightful imperfections without trepidation. In the days that followed, I found myself not just embracing my own imperfections but becoming a beacon for others. My next project, an intricate shawl, turned out to be a manifold of unique colors and patterns, much like the people I cherished in my life. I started sharing my creative process on social media, inviting others to join along as we crocheted together. The response was overwhelming, each post lit up with comments of shared experiences of crafting, bonds formed through honest discussion about life's inevitable messiness. The shawl became a metaphor for every bit of vibrant imperfection, adorned with laughter and tales of growth. I gifted it to Lucy on her birthday, a symbol not of our struggles but of our flourishing friendship. As I handed it to her, the embrace we shared held unspoken words of understanding and gratitude, weaving together all we had experienced. And so, as I come to the close of this reflection, I realize how the greatest creations in my life, be it in crochet or in relationships, have come not from striving for perfection, but from daring to embrace chaos. The blanket still serves as a memento, a connection between two souls learning to navigate their own paths, and I welcome each new stitch I add to the ongoing tapestry of friendship and love that life continues to offer. In this journey, I have found joy not just in the finished product but in every knot, twist, and turn we face, and there lies true beauty. I never imagined my life could pivot so dramatically over something as mundane as a locked door, but here I am, recounting the events of that fateful evening with a sense of incredulity that still lingers. My name is Alex, an ordinary 30-something guy with a desk job and a comfortable little home nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I've always prided myself on being a conscientious husband, but like everyone else, I have my moments of negligence, and perhaps it was a combination of those moments that set this all in motion. It was a Thursday night, typical in every way, until I caught a glimpse of my wife, Laura, standing by the front door, her expression a mixture of frustration and disbelief, the kind that made my chest tighten in an instant. She was holding the doorknob, twisting it back and forth while I was half awake from a cozy couch nap, remnants of my evening routine still fresh in my mind, the warm glow of the TV, a snack bowl emptied, and the soft hum of the world outside. Laura asked me, with a sting of disappointment, if I had checked the lock after she'd gone to bed, and as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, I realized I had utterly spaced on that detail, again. I shrugged it off at first, making casual remarks about how I trust our neighborhood and how we had lived there for years without incident. But in the back of my mind, I felt a creeping unease as I watched her react, her brow furrowed as she responded, "It's not about trusting the neighborhood, Alex. It's about being safe." A part of me wanted to laugh it away, to dismiss her concerns as overreactions like I once did during our years together, but as she continued to express her frustration, I felt a knot forming in my stomach, linking back to my own lack of accountability. Was I really that oblivious? It became clear that this situation was a metaphorical lock waiting to be clicked open, revealing deeper issues that may have long since festered beneath our shared surface. Days passed, and the conversation wafted in and out of my mind, my interactions with Laura feeling increasingly stifled like the air on a humid summer day. I'd watch her move through the house, her movement subtle yet heavy with a sense of grounded concern, the way a cloud hangs low and suspenseful, threatening rain. I noticed the little things, the way she double-checked the locks on the windows during the day, her growing habit of closing the blinds earlier than usual, her hesitance to walk to the mailbox alone. The peaceful rhythms of our life together felt interrupted as I tried to ignore the gnawing sensation at the back of my mind. The evening we normally spent side by side on the couch morphed into quiet, fragmented moments filled with awkward silences. It all came to a head one night when I returned home later than usual after meeting some friends for dinner. There she stood in the living room, awaiting my arrival like a lighthouse beacon cutting through the fog, arms crossed with a stern look on her face that I'd never seen aimed directly at me. I opened my mouth to greet her, but the words caught in my throat. I could sense it was more than just the locked door. "Did you even check the door?" Her voice was steady but tinged with a puncturing edge that stung more than I cared to admit. I hesitated, the silence stretching into a chasm. "No, I didn't," I finally admitted, the echo of those words reverberating through the room like a confession made under duress. "I just assumed you had it." It felt pathetic, my own excuse evaporating into the atmosphere. My stomach twisted again, I could see pain flickering through her eyes, an emotion beyond mere frustration, a sense of betrayal, of being let down by me, the one person she should be able to count on. Suddenly, it struck me, it wasn't just about the door, it was about trust, about dependence, about the fragile threads that held together our relationship. I realized how much she leaned on me, expected me to be her rock, and I had neglected even the simplest thread keeping our safety intact. As we sat on the couch that night, the air thick with unspoken words and fragile hopes, I squeezed her hand and spoke softly, "I'm sorry. I thought I was being rational, but I wasn't being responsible. I promised to do better, to pay attention, to make you feel safe, not just when it's convenient for me." She responded by tracing her fingers along my palm, the tension easing as the minutes passed. The silence transformed from oppressive to contemplative, and we found ourselves deep in conversation, navigating our fears, our trust, and the small yet pressing details of our shared lives. As the moonlight spilled through the window, I understood that the lock was just a symptom of a deeper issue, my unpredictability and her need for assurance. Weeks later, our routines began to shift. I made it a point to verify every lock, not just for Laura, but as a symbol of my commitment to being present and responsible. The atmosphere in our home brightened, she smiled more, and we dove into rebuilding that connective thread, one soft conversation, one warm touch at a time. Reflection filled those quiet moments. We'd sit together on the couch, and as she leaned against me, I felt a new kind of peace emerging from our shared vulnerability. And so, in the spirit of Reddit tradition and as a reflection of this journey, I find it important to add this update. The evening I thought we were heading toward a rift transformed instead into an awakening. It wasn't just about the door or even the act of locking it, it became a way to openly articulate our needs, desires, and fears. I learned that perhaps it wasn't an AITA situation at all. Perhaps, instead, it was AITA, am I trying to learn? Because in that small, seemingly trivial episode, I discovered something profound about love, trust, and the importance of the little things in creating a safe harbor we could always come home to. The door has never been left unlocked. Again, and neither have our hearts. As the weeks rolled into months following our profound conversation about the door, I found myself reflecting on the subtle transformations in our relationship. It became a game of sorts, where each night, as I prepared to settle into bed, I would gently remind Lucy to double-check the lock, teasing her playfully about my newfound security obsession. I could feel the fortress we were building, not merely around our home but within each other, grow stronger and stronger. It was surprising how such a simple act could blossom into moments filled with tenderness and laughter, a little more anticipation before sleep took us. We began establishing new rituals, little habits that weren't mandated by duty but born out of a desire to nurture our partnership. Each evening concluded with us sharing a cup of tea on the porch, watching the day melt into night, with the faint sounds of crickets filling the air, a gentle reminder that life outside continued in a rhythm we were beginning to appreciate together. I started to look at our relationship with a new lens, where open communication became our foundation, and vulnerability, once a source of anxiety, transformed into our shared strength. I cherished those confiding moments with Lucy, preparing dinner together and laughing over burnt bread, the usual small talk evolving into deeper discussions about our hopes for the future. Conversations flowed like sacred threads binding us closer, so much so that I almost forgot what it felt like to walk that thin line of misunderstanding that we had been teetering on prior. It amazed me how our vulnerabilities morphed into stepping stones, carving pathways to rediscover the intricacies of each other's souls, learning, once again, what made us who we were. There were times, of course, where we stumbled. There were disagreements around financial decisions or the occasional miscommunication that prompted a surge of frustration, but even then, instead of retreating into silent resentments, we breathed, discussed, and gently nudged each other toward a healthier understanding. I realized that those moments are just as essential as the laughter-filled ones, they rounded us out. However, the true test of this new dynamic came on a chilly autumn night. The air bit fiercely against our cheeks, and the neighbors' laughter echoed through the street, reminding me of the warmth radiating from our home. Lucy and I were cozied up on the couch, engrossed in a movie, when suddenly an urgent knocking interrupted the cozy ambience. My heart raced. Was it a stranger? A lost traveler? That familiar feeling of anxiety tugged at my chest as I glanced at Lucy, who only nodded, encouraging me to check the door. It felt as if time had slowed. I walked to the front door, the wooden floor creaking beneath my weight, feeling every heartbeat pulsing in my ears. Peering through the peephole, I was met with a young girl, maybe 10 years old, shivering and teary-eyed. I opened the door just enough to speak. "Hey there, are you all right?" Her face was lost in shadows, but I could make out the tremor of her chin and the way she rubbed her arms together, as if trying to generate warmth. I got lost. Can I call my dad? He's just around the corner." My mind spun. Here I was, in our safe bubble, our haven, facing a potential crisis. A moment of fear tangled with empathy bubbled inside me. It was a test of everything we had learned, our commitment to openness, to addressing fears head on. "Of course, sweetie, come in," I said, opening the door wider and motioning for her to step inside. As the warmth enveloped her, she glanced back at the darkened street, her eyes wide with uncertainty. I knew that this small act could either shield her further from threats or potentially lead to something more dangerous. Lucy joined us, her nurturing presence illuminating the moment, and we quickly settled into a space of safety and comfort. I reached for my phone, handed it to the girl, and patted her on the shoulder. "Just dial the number you remember. We're right here with you." The girl's hands shook as she dialed, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke to her father. She relaxed slightly upon hearing him say he was on the way, and when she hung up the phone, her relief washed over me, filling the room with a profound quiet that seemed to hold stories of fear and safety in equal measure. When her dad finally arrived, our home transformed again, this time into a sanctuary, a temporary refuge. The girl rushed into her father's arms, and I felt an overwhelming gratitude that we were able to offer even this tiny comfort amidst her disarray. After exchanging pleasantries and ensuring she was safe, the father made it clear how invaluable our kindness was, lighting a small flame of warmth within me. After they left, as Lucy and I settled back down on the couch, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for everything in our life together. It suddenly struck me that it wasn't merely about locking the door, it was about being open to the world outside, understanding that the safety and love we built weren't just for ourselves but could spill over into interactions that mattered with everyone around us. The door, once just an entryway to our home, had morphed into a symbol of our commitment to compassion and understanding, not just for each other but for anyone who crossed our threshold. I turned to Lucy, and we exchanged a smile filled with warmth and an unspoken promise that we would always remain open, vulnerable but secure, cautious yet loving, a true masterpiece of coexistence. And in those moments of quiet reflection, surrounded by the fading light of the evening, I finally felt the weight of the world lift just a little, reminding me that love doesn't simply build walls, rather, it constructs bridges that lead us back to humanity, again and again, one gentle reminder, one locked door, at a time. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across our cozy living room, I could feel the gentle hum of evening settling in, the kind that wraps you in a cocoon of comfort. Lucy had lit a few candles, their soft glow flickering in harmony with the settling tranquility of the night. It was a small ritual we had embraced, a moment of unwinding where the chaos of the day seemed to melt away. The warmth of her presence reminded me that we had crafted a safe space together, not just through the physical act of locking the door, but through the emotional openness we had nurtured in our relationship. Pacing softly, I felt grateful for this revelation, how something as simple as a door could serve as a metaphor for our willingness to safeguard one another's vulnerabilities. "Remember that night?" Lucy asked, her voice laced with a gentle nostalgia as she curled up on the couch, her eyes sparkling with memories. "The one where we both brainstormed a list of our fears?" She chuckled lightly, and I joined in, recalling a time when our insecurities seemed larger than life. We had laughed as we shared everything from mundane anxieties about work to deeper concerns about our relationship. That honest exchange had unknowingly paved the way for our newfound understanding of what it meant to connect, truly connect, beyond surface-level conversations. "Yeah," I replied, settling in beside her and draping an arm around her shoulders. "It's amazing how vulnerability can turn into strength if we let it." The moment felt precious, the world outside blurring into insignificance as we cocooned ourselves in this intimate bubble of safety. We began to share not just our fears, but our dreams, each whisper more soothing than the last, forming a tapestry of hopes that we would nurture together. I felt a rush of contentment, realizing that each lock I checked, each door I secured, was a commitment, an act of love that transcended fear and doubt. As the bits and pieces of our evening unfolded, conversations sparked like fireworks, our discourse ranging from future vacations we dreamed about to our desire to bring a pet into our home. Lucy was still talking about getting a dog, something I had initially hesitated over, wary of the added responsibility, but the way she spoke, her eyes lighting up at the thought, began to chip away at my resistance. A dog would be more than just an addition to our lives, it would be a shared experience, a reminder of how love could flourish in the little moments, from morning walks to lazy afternoons spent on the couch. With every word exchanged, I felt the door we had just locked moments before transform into one that swung wide open, inviting in a rush of warmth. As the candles flickered gently, casting playful shadows on the walls, I could see what lay ahead of us, a future painted in shades of laughter, compassion, and unwavering support. It was empowering to realize that we weren't just locking away our fears, we were also sealing in our joys, ensuring that nothing could breach the sanctuary we were building together. In time, as the evening wore on and the moon cast a silver glow through our window, I took a moment to breathe deeply and internalize the warmth of this connection we were nurturing. The world outside felt distant, almost irrelevant, as I realized that our relationship had morphed from merely coexisting to truly living, a shared journey where each step was marked by intention and understanding. Have you ever thought about how locking the door is kind of a ritual? I mused aloud, breaking the comfortable silence that had enveloped us like a soft blanket. Lucy nodded, her dark hair catching a glimmer of candlelight. It's the first step we take in closing out the outside world, she said thoughtfully, but it also makes space for us to just be, here, in our little world. It's our way of saying, this is our time. We matter. Yes. I replied, feeling a swell of pride and love. It wasn't just about locking the door, it was about what it symbolized, the commitment to honor our space and each other. The balancing of boundaries and openness that allowed for growth without losing our individuality. I couldn't help but smile, envisioning the dog we might someday share. Next door might be the kids, or the noise of the world, but in this moment, it's just us. As the last flicker of the candles dimmed, I felt a deep reassurance envelope me, a tender acknowledgement that our bond was evolving in ways that were once unimaginable. I snuggled closer to Lucy, feeling the warmth radiating from her, a beacon in the cool night. The locked door wasn't just a safeguard, it was a promise we had made to each other, a vow to always return to the safe harbor we had created. And so, as I closed my eyes and allowed sleep to wash over me, I found solace in the laughter that echoed through the evening and the new dreams we would embrace upon waking. A door locked, yet ajar with possibility, standing as a testament to our journey. And with that, I drifted into sleep, content, loved, and forever learning. The soft hum of the summer air filled my lungs as I leaned back against my old porch swing, the creaking rhythm calming me, but still the unease twisted like a vine in my stomach. I had always considered myself a peacemaker, the kind of person who would rather diffuse a tense situation than throw a match at it, but here I was, grappling with a decision that felt monumental. My best friend Jenna had been meticulously planning a family vacation for months, a week-long getaway to the coast that she'd promised would be filled with laughter, beach bonfires, and endless sunshine. However, the excitement I felt morphed into something sour when, at a recent gathering, Jenna's brother Alex introduced me to his girlfriend, Tara. From the moment we shook hands, I could tell something was off. Tara had a way of smiling that felt forced, as if she were performing for an audience rather than engaging in a genuine interaction. Still, I brushed off my instincts, telling myself I was being overly sensitive. But it didn't take long for her true demeanor to surface. During a casual conversation with a group of friends, I had made a harmless joke about how I would never be brave enough to go bungee jumping, and Tara laughed a little too loudly, before leaning in and saying, "Well, good thing you're already so grounded, there's no chance of you jumping off anything anytime soon." It was meant to be a quip, but something in her tone pierced deeper into me, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I chose to ignore it, hoping it was a one-off incident. However, the comments soon escalated into a series of passive-aggressive jabs aimed at my tastes in music and my professional aspirations, each one wrapped in a layer of mockery that left me feeling increasingly small. I knew Tara was Jenna's brother's girlfriend and that I had to play it cool for the sake of everyone else, but when the day came for the beach trip, I felt a seething ball of anxiety lodged in my throat as memories of Tara's comments replayed like a broken record. When I got the message from Jenna, confirming the details of the trip, it struck my mind like a hammer. "You excited for family time?" It read, and my heart sank. How could I possibly enjoy a week in close quarters with someone who belittled me at every turn? Thoughts raced through my head. It seemed so trivial on the surface, but I had always been taught that you should trust your gut, no matter how small the issue may seem. Should I express my concerns, tell her what her brother's girlfriend had done to me? Or would it make me seem overdramatic, an asshole ruining a family vacation? I wrestled with myself throughout the night, tossing and turning until morning brought clarity, not resolution, but clarity. I had to make a choice, either go and endure the taunts or cut my losses and cancel my reservation, which felt like a betrayal against Jenna, who had so eagerly planned this trip. As the sun rose, I decided that I wouldn't attend this trip. I thought about how I deserved to be treated better, that allowing Tara to ruin something I had looked forward to would only deepen my frustration. I sent Jenna a calm and thoughtful message, explaining my feelings and why I felt I could not join them this time around. I poured my heart into those words, conveying that it wasn't her fault, and nothing to do with the family. It was about wanting to protect my own peace. The response came quickly, and my stomach churned as I watched the 3 little bubbles appear and disappear, Jenna typing and erasing, typing again. Finally, her message arrived, "I'm sorry. I had no idea. Do you want to talk about it?" In that moment, a wave of relief washed over me. I had chosen the right path. We talked later that evening, and I explained my experiences with Tara. Jenna listened patiently, her understanding soothing the wounds of doubt I had bandaged throughout the day. She expressed her apologies for me feeling uncomfortable, assuring me that she would discuss it with Alex, but also emphasized that she knew how hard it was to navigate complicated relationships within families. As we talked, something began to shift in my perspective. Perhaps Jenna wouldn't harbor resentment towards my decision after all, and with that thought came a mix of gratitude and sadness. It felt liberating in a way I hadn't anticipated. We ended our conversation with a casual promise to hang out soon, just the 2 of us. A few days later, I received a call from Jenna. "You won't believe this," she began with a laugh. After talking to Alex about Tara, he broke up with her. Apparently, she had been treating him that way too. Her voice cracked with laughter, but it wasn't malicious. It was clear Jenna found humor in the situation and validation in my choice to step away. As I hung up, I realized that I hadn't been the asshole I had feared becoming. I had done something brave, established boundaries. Sure, not everyone would understand my decision to skip the trip, but it felt undeniably right. I couldn't help but reflect on how sometimes prioritizing your own well-being could lead to a happier outcome than you'd ever expected, and as I settled back into my swing, the summer air cradled me like an embrace, reminding me that I had made the right choice. My story echoed in the quiet of my thoughts. Speaking up was an act of self-love. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the sky, I let the stillness of the evening wrap around me like a comforting blanket. The tension from earlier in the week, those heated moments filled with uncertainty and anxiety, slowly began to dissolve into a mere backdrop of distant anxiety, allowing for introspection to take center stage. It was strange how life could shift so abruptly. One moment I was gearing up for what I thought would be a joyful family vacation with friends, and the next, I was choosing personal boundaries over chaotic gatherings that had become tinged with past grievances. I had known Sarah and her family for years. We shared countless gatherings, laughter-filled dinners, and holiday celebrations. Their home was a second family to me, yet the arrival of Jake's girlfriend, Mia, had changed the atmosphere entirely. She was charming enough to sweep her way into their circles, but beneath that veneer, I had sensed a thickness, a harshness I couldn't quite grasp until she unleashed her venomous remarks directly at me. The way she laughed, but not with me, always at my expense, fueling my insecurities to a raging fire, igniting a storm of emotions I felt powerless against. The night I confronted her, my nerves buzzed with anxiety, but a flicker of determination pushed me through. I stood up for myself, only to be met with condescension and mockery, a cacophony that echoed in the corners of my mind long after the conversation ended. The vacation had felt like an ultimatum. Either I pressured myself to endure another week of harassment disguised as humor, or I chose to walk away. But it was more than just a stressful week away. It was a reflection of a greater truth I'd been unwilling to acknowledge until now. I had convinced myself that I was hypersensitive, that maybe my reactions stemmed from personal insecurities rather than a genuine threat to my emotional well-being, but with every snide remark I recalled, I learned that my discomfort was valid. I deserved peace. Settling into my porch swing, the gentle creaking brought my mind back to the fleeting moments of boldness I'd felt when I finally said no. It felt as if a weight had lifted, and I marveled at the idea that sometimes, brave actions can spur waves of change we never expected. The afternoon breeze tangled playfully with my hair, carrying the scent of blooming flowers, and I grinned slightly, realizing that the warmth didn't just come from the setting sun but also from within my heart, a sense of freedom. I was finally free from the expectation that dictated how I should feel or act around people who did not respect me. The sun disappeared, casting the world into a soft twilight, and I settled into the stillness, letting the sounds of the night surround me. A distant thunder roll reminded me that storms could come, whether they were weather-related or within our relationships, and I realized something deeper, that it was okay to sometimes choose the calm solitude over the chaos, even if it meant stepping away from the people I loved. Before I knew it, my mind wandered to the possibility of how Sarah might react. She was the glue of our group, and I worried she would be disappointed or upset that I was skipping out. But what I knew with certainty was that I had put myself first, and for once, the discomfort of saying no transformed into the relief of being true to whom I had become. The night offered a sense of resolution, wrapping me in an almost dreamlike embrace, begging me to turn inward and reflect. I settled deeper into the swing, feeling the rhythm of life around me lull my thoughts into a soft hum. Perhaps tomorrow would bring new revelations and a deeper understanding of how to navigate relationships moving forward. As sleep beckoned, I found solace in the quiet and the decision I had made, a reminder that self-love doesn't just mean indulging in things that make you happy but also means having the courage to say enough is enough. And with that comforting thought in my mind, cradled by the feathery embrace of the summer night, I surrendered to the soft whisper of sleep. The days that followed were a gentle blur, a harmonious blend of quiet moments and the mundane rhythm of daily life. It was remarkable how, with my newfound clarity, even the simplest of routines felt more vibrant. My morning coffee tasted richer, the sunlight pouring through the window seemed warmer, and even my interactions with friends became more fulfilling. I reveled in this feeling, sinking deeper into the comfort of my own company, though a slight twinge of worry tugged at the edges of my contentment. Sure, I had been resolute in my decision to skip the family vacation, but there was a lingering thought that perhaps my friend had seen it as a betrayal rather than a necessary boundary. I could only imagine the conversations that buzzed among her family. They were close-knit, and I knew my choice wouldn't have gone unspoken. As the end of the week approached, I received a message from my friend, a simple "Hey, can we talk?" And I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. It felt as if the air had thickened, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I hesitated, finger hovering over the screen as I contemplated my next move. What could she want to discuss? Would she confront me about my decision, or would she still be understanding? I took a deep breath, recalling the peace of that summer night, reminding myself that I was not only allowed to advocate for my own well-being but that I should cherish my needs in the same way I cherished my friendships. When we finally met up at our usual cafe, the one with the checkered tablecloths that always felt homey despite how tucked away it was from the bustling main street, my heart raced. She was already seated, her brow furrowed as she fiddled with the napkin, and I felt a rush of regret wash over me at the sight of her distress. I slid into the seat across from her, searching her eyes for clues, wanting nothing more than to dissolve the tension that lined the air between us. "Hey," she started, her voice soft yet laced with unease. "I've heard some things." And just like that, I felt my heartbeat quicken. She launched into the conversation, revealing whispers of concern from her family, comments that I was being unreasonable or selfish. Deep down, I expected this kind of fallout. It was a reflection of how affectionately they all seemed to regard one another, but I also found a flicker of disappointment creeping in as she relayed their sentiments. "I just wish you could have talked it out with us, you know? I thought we were on the same team," she murmured, her eyes dim reflecting confusion. In that moment, I felt a rush of emotions surge through me, anger, guilt, and a tinge of sadness. I wanted to lash out, to explain how her brother's girlfriend's behavior had threatened my peace, that my choice wasn't born of spite but of necessity. Yet her hurt was palpable, and I could sense my need to defend myself was clashing with the urge to reassure her. "I understand how it might seem," I began slowly, choosing my words with care. "But I had to protect myself. The way she treated me, it wasn't right. I tried to reach out to you, but every time I did, it felt like there was more tension, and I truly did fear what being around her would mean for me." For a moment, silence fell between us. I watched her shoulders relax slightly as she processed my words, and although I wished desperately for a way to bridge the gap that had formed, I held my breath, hoping that understanding would find its way between us. Eventually, she lifted her gaze, and there was a soft vulnerability in her expression. "I wish you had just told me everything sooner," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "None of us are perfect, and I don't regret wanting to include you. I guess it just hurt hearing you weren't coming along. I'm always grateful for friendships, I thought as we talked, pained in the moment yet intertwined in a kind of healing I hadn't expected. While she didn't outright apologize for her family's words, nor could I expect her to, we both recognized a pathway back to each other, one paved with honesty and understanding. As we navigated through our feelings and learned how to express our vulnerability, I felt the weight begin to lift from my chest, replaced by the flicker of something warm and familiar. We spent the rest of that afternoon laughing over shared memories and even exchanging stories about our most awkward moments. By the time we parted, the tension had dissipated, and we were back on that familiar wavelength, the bond more profound for having tested its limits. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, like returning home after a long journey, and in my heart, I acknowledged that friendships, like life, would have their peaks and valleys. Weeks later, I received a postcard from their trip. There was my friend's cheerful handwriting, accompanied by a sweet note about the beach days and messy adventures, all punctuated by light-hearted illustrations. As I hung it up on my fridge, right next to the one from my own getaway, I realized the power of choice was a beacon for light in my life. It reminded me that standing up for my well-being didn't just protect me, it encouraged a space for openness and connection. The quiet comfort of being true to myself weaved itself into the friendships I cherished. In the larger narrative of my life, I learned that sometimes the ripples of a choice echo much longer than the initial impact, and the often scarier path of honesty and vulnerability not only nourishes my soul but also elevates the relationships I hold dear. I settled back into my swing one evening as summer whispered its last goodbyes, feeling eternally grateful for the lessons learned, the connections healed, and the quiet strength that grew in the acceptance of my own worth. As I closed my eyes that evening, lulled once more by the familiar sounds of dusk, I realized every step on this journey was but another beautiful stroke on the canvas of my life, colorful, wild, and utterly mine to shape. It started as a normal Tuesday morning, the kind where you barely have time to sip your coffee before racing out the door for work. My job at a modest tech company in Seattle had become my routine. I was programmed to rise, work, and repeat, barely catching my breath in between. It was a dreary day, the clouds thick with the promise of rain, and I settled into my chair beneath the fluorescent lights, half listening to my coworkers' banter about the latest game release and plans for the weekend. That was when it happened, a sudden, loud buzz originating from all our screens, followed by the words flashing in bold, uppercase letters, "Hide." I looked around, stunned. My boss, usually the calm in any storm, froze mid-sentence, his eyes wide. A collective murmur spread like wildfire through the office as coworkers pulled out their phones only to find the same message plastered across social media, news apps, even our personal devices. Panic began to seep in, that creeping sense of dread rooted deep within my gut, as people scrambled to understand what was happening. I live alone, and my thoughts instantly drifted to my neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, an elderly woman who often relied on my borrowed sugar and occasional help with her garden. After a few moments of confusion, I found myself racing up the stairs, urgency propelling my movements. By the time I knocked on her door, I was shaking. I had already mentally rehearsed a myriad of possibilities. Was this a prank? A glitch? I heard shuffling from inside, followed by her croaky voice beckoning me to enter. Dropping my fear like a heavy coat on the rack, I stepped into her dimly lit apartment. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, a feeble attempt to mask the cooking smells from the night before. Mrs. Hargrove was seated on her threadbare couch, clutching her knitting needles like a lifeline. "Did you hear it, too?" she asked, eyes darting to the window as if the world outside would provide answers. We turned on the television, and the news broadcasters, usually so composed, were stumbling over their words, repeating the message, advising people to stay indoors, turn off their lights, and remain quiet. An inexplicable fear rippled through me. We sat together in comfortable silence, knitted tightly by the uncertainty of the moment, only the occasional crackle of the TV filling the void. My hand found hers, her warmth was a small comfort against the cold that crept into my bones. Hours passed, but the message remained, echoing in my mind, urging everyone to hide. I thought of how many times I'd taken her for granted, how our chats of mundane things, weather and gardening, had become my escape. We were two souls lost in an inexplicable moment, clinging to each other for reassurance even as her fear morphed into something deeper. As the sun began to set, shrouding the room in shadows, my phone buzzed insistently, notifications continued to pile up. I glanced at the screen. To my astonishment, the message had changed. It now read, "Doubt leads to vulnerability. Remain silent." With a chill, I looked at Mrs. Hargrove, whose hand was now tightening around mine, her eyes wide. "What does it mean?" I whispered, the question heavy with unsaid fears. She merely shrugged, her gaze flickering towards the flickering television, now filled with static. Then, just as quickly as the chaos had begun, it was gone. The screens turned blank, the world outside returned to its untroubled state, yet we sat, entangled in each other's worry, stunned silence stretching between us like an unbridgeable chasm. The next morning brought no clarity, we had not slept a wink, the tension of those hours weighing on our hearts like lead. As we emerged from our hiding, both bewildered and exhausted, I found the streets oddly sterile, the people moving through their routines with a peculiar detachment, almost as if they'd decided together to forget that one insidious message. My mind raced back to the uncertainty of that night, and a secret buried deep within me began to unfurl. The event had acted like a mirror, reflecting my own hidden fears, not for my life but for the connections I had taken so lightly. Mrs. Hargrove and I soon became inseparable. Our shared experience forged an unspoken pact, binding us together in our quiet sanctuary. As mundane as the days turned, I never went a day without checking in, ensuring she was well. It seemed that, in those moments of fear, I had found something truly precious, a friendship built from vulnerability, long evenings spent sipping tea and knitting, exchanging stories that reminded me of the beauty hidden within the everyday. And every now and then, when the shadows started closing in and the world felt too loud, I'd catch myself glancing at the windows, half wondering if the screens would ignite again, awakening the part of us that we'd left behind. Months passed, and just as I began to feel entirely at home in my newfound reality, I received a notification on my phone one evening, a message from somewhere unknown. Scrolling past the usual mundane alerts, my heart raced as my eyes locked onto the words flickering across the screen, "It's not over." In that moment, the cozy blanket of comfort that had enveloped my days peeled away, exposing me to the chill of uncertainty once more, and the thought echoed in my mind, what exactly was lurking in the shadows, waiting for another opportunity to strike? Now, it wasn't the screens I feared. It was my own heart, wondering if it had been bold enough to open itself up once again or if the next message would tell me to hide, again. The days that followed were punctuated by a strange mixture of paranoia and nostalgia. I often found myself staring at my phone, waiting for another message to flicker across my screen, as if it would somehow provide clarity in the whirlwind of confusion that had engulfed my thoughts. The sense of foreboding clung to me like a ghost, whispering reminders of the darkness that had nearly consumed me before, a darkness I thought I'd escaped. I had opened up to my closest friend, Lily, a few months back about my struggles, how a year-long battle with anxiety had left me feeling shackled within my own mind. It was thrilling to finally share my burden, yet with every confession, I felt that I've pushed her away, entangling her in my turmoil. She would often tell me it was brave to be vulnerable, yet my heart ached for the distance I imagined between us. Those late-night conversations over steaming cups of chamomile did fill the cracks in my soul, yet as dread seeped in again, I wondered if any breakthrough was truly positive. The messages hadn't just stirred fear, they unearthed old wounds, like a physician ripping off a bandage that had long since bonded with skin, leaving the tender flesh exposed and raw. Whenever Lily would check in, her texts were laced with a delicate balance of concern and cheerfulness that made my heart ache for the carefree days we once shared. Deep down, I wondered if I could muster the courage to tell her how the recent turn of events had reopened those emotions, and in a way, placed a wedge between us, a wedge invisible to her but painfully evident to me. One evening, just as the sky turned from a pale blue to a soft bruised purple, I found myself scrolling through old photos to stave off the rising anxiety. Images of laughter and impromptu adventures formed a tapestry of trust that felt almost foreign now. I stumbled upon a snapshot of us at the beach, Lily with her wild curls dancing in the wind, her laughter ringing like a melody that I could still hear faintly in the air. It was beautiful, and it temporarily dulled the chaotic thoughts racing in my mind. Yet, a sudden ping from my phone yanked me back to reality, and I instinctively glanced down to see that the ominous message had reappeared, just like it had before, "Hide." My breath hitched in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat prickle along my skin. In that moment, it wasn't the words that chilled me, it was the implication that whatever was sending these messages had returned, and this time, it was looking for more than just my attention. Feeling desperate, I called Lily, my heart pounding with a blend of dread and hope. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice a soft balm to my frayed nerves. I hesitated, the familiar anxiety clawing its way back, but I could feel her unwavering concern wrapping around me like a safety net. "No, it isn't," I finally admitted. And as I spilled my soul, describing the messages and the weight of my fear, a part of me feared she'd brush it off, that she'd think I was being melodramatic. Instead, she listened, unwavering. After a long silence, Lily replied softly, "We'll figure this out together. You're not alone in this." Just hearing her say that made a warmth bloom in my chest. Perhaps I had misjudged our connection, believing the heaviness in my heart had dimmed my light enough to distance us. But there. She was, steadfast and true, reminding me that not all shadows had to be faced alone. Over the next few days, we navigated this precarious situation together. We dived into threads of conversation, piecing together the cryptic messages that seemed to proliferate overnight. Lily encouraged me to document each one, treating them as clues in a puzzle. As we turned our fears into a project, our bond grew stronger. We spent nights on the phone, diving into the mystery, allowing it to infuse a sense of purpose that we both desperately craved. And then, one fateful night, as I lay in bed flipping through the accumulated screenshots, ready to drift into sleep, something unprecedented happened. My screen lit up, and the words that gripped my heart broke like the dawn cracking through the dark: "Hide. But not from what you think." Confusion swirled through me, the word but felt like a key unlocking something deeper. Hiding from what? Suddenly the messages felt less like threats and more like a guiding hand, steering me towards something unknown. As I filled with determination, I snapped a photo of the screen and sent it to Lily, who replied almost instantly, fired with excitement rather than fear. "It's a clue. We need to figure out what this means." There was a long pause on my end as I considered the implications. What if this was the turning point? What if whatever darkness had clung to me now had turned itself into a riddle, daring us to explore rather than cower? As we brainstormed possible meanings, an idea began to take shape in my mind, a quirky venture through local urban legends, a path that could lead to scattered pieces of the puzzle hidden throughout our town. The notion that the world wasn't just void of shadows, but also alive with the stories of others, breathed a sense of exhilaration into my soul. We had started something larger than ourselves, twisting dread into a shared adventure and recalibrating our relationship with each word we scrawled over old maps, feeling like true detectives across a mosaic of vibrant stories waiting to be unveiled. Perhaps I was slowly embracing the shadows, not as a harbinger of despair, but as a canvas upon which new experiences could be painted. The messages weren't just warnings, at least, not entirely. They became gateways to an old friend and a reminder that even when darkness loomed, there was light to be found in unity, adventure, and courage. And as I shut my eyes that night, I held on to that thought, the thrill of the unknown blossoming within me, not as a threat but as an invitation, a chance to rewrite our story together, one hidden message at a time. The next morning greeted me with a hesitant light creeping through the curtains, softening the edges of the trepidation still clinging to me like a heavy mist. Instinctively, I reached for my phone, half expecting another cryptic message waiting for me, but this time there was nothing, just the dull maintenance of my usual notifications. The absence of alert from the screens around me felt oddly louder than any of the messages I had previously seen. As my caffeine-fueled thoughts began to swirl, I considered how I would address Lucy. She had been a pillar of strength throughout this bizarre ordeal, sharing her own fears and curiosities with me over late-night cups of tea. Together, we had spent countless hours unraveling the mysteries woven into those chilling notifications, our conversations bridging the gap between the surreal and the rational. "It's not over," I whispered to myself, a confession of my lingering anxieties, as I prepared to head to her apartment for our usual Saturday brunch ritual. The sun had risen to its rightful place in the sky, but a nagging sense of foreboding remained, reminding me that beneath the tranquil surface, there was an unsettling current waiting just to be recognized. When I arrived, Lucy was already seated at the table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug as she gazed out at the colorful leaves dancing in the autumn breeze. There was a look of pensive serenity on her face, and for the briefest moment, I wished I could share that calmness. But as I slid into the chair across from her, I could feel the weight of the past few days clash against the warmth of her smile. "Hey, you," she said, her voice bright, "I was just thinking about how wild it was that we both got the same notification last night. Did you freak out too?" A laugh bubbled up from my throat that was more nervous than amused, yet I could see the sincerity in her eyes. "It's crazy, right? I mean, not just what it said, but how it makes you feel, like we're being roped into something much bigger than ourselves," I replied, glimpsing the unease that lurked behind her smile. With each shared moment, each comforting caress of friendship, I began to lose some of the tension that had tightened its grip on my chest. Over pancakes drizzled in syrup and steaming cups of tea, we ventured deeper into discussions about the messages, what they could possibly mean and how they seemed to weave in and out of our lives, like a narrative tether tying us both to something greater. The hours rolled by, merging laughter with serious contemplations, as we mapped out a series of possibilities. By the time we finished our brunch, a plan had begun to form, an exploration we were both willing to embark on. We would confront this strange phenomenon together, stepping beyond the comfort of our homes into the realm of the unknown, equipped only with our wits, a shared sense of adventure, and the lingering warmth of our connection. In the days that followed, we gathered intel, combed through our social media feeds for clues, and reached out to others who had experienced similar eerie messages, weaving a network of support that spanned far wider than we anticipated. Then one evening, as twilight wrapped the world in a shimmering whiff of mystery, we received a different kind of message. This one appeared on our phones with an urgency that pulled at the beads of fear and excitement strung within us. Find the light. My heart raced at the implications. What did it mean, finding light? Was it a physical location or a metaphorical endeavor? Both Lucy and I felt the thrill of plunging into uncharted territory, an adventure where we would become co-authors of the story the universe had chosen to share with us. We centralized our efforts to the town's old library, a labyrinth of dusty tomes and forgotten relics that had fostered many youthful imaginations. There, beneath the worn shelves, countless lives had intersected with stories that lingered in the margins, a serene backdrop for our quest. I wandered into the musty aisles brimming with nostalgia, trying to interpret the message as I climbed the well-worn wooden stepladder toward a collection of novels hidden high above the lesser-explored stacks. It was a slow and meaningful search, our hearts synchronized, tinged with an understanding that what we sought wasn't just an answer but a piece of ourselves amidst the chaos. It was Lucy who discovered it first, a small brass lamp hidden behind a thick volume of poetry, retreating silently from the world but undeniably beckoning us to turn it on. As the electricity coursed through its threads, a warm golden hue expelled shadows from the corners of the library, melting them away like whispers in the night. And it was in that light, amidst the stacks surrounding us like an embrace, that we felt a pulse of reassurance thrumming through our hearts. The messages had never been solely about warnings or reminders to hide, they had been guiding us toward the light, the very essence of connection, friendship, and courage to face whatever lay ahead. As I stood there, my fears unfurling like dried leaves in the breeze, I turned to Lucy, whose smile sparkled brighter than any flickering screen. We were no longer simply ghostly passengers caught in the web of fear, we had woven ourselves into a vibrant tapestry of camaraderie, ready to face whatever mysteries awaited us. The realization struck me profoundly, and as I closed my eyes in gratitude for her presence, I understood that this was just the beginning of a new adventure, a chance to embrace the unknown together, not as separate entities but as two hearts, one journey, united under the gentle warmth of the light we had found. In the days that followed, the world outside continued its rhythm, blissfully unaware of the small spark of light we had ignited in our own lives. I often felt the thrill of messages flickering across screens, but now they were no longer sentences of fear. Instead, they transformed into whispers of adventure, encouraging exploration anew. Perhaps the forthcoming challenges would come with shadows, but armed with the knowledge that even darkness could illuminate paths yet unknown, I felt more than ready. And with Lucy beside me, I realized we were not merely searching for answers. We were crafting a narrative of resilience and hope, one that welcomed and embraced the shadows, because sometimes, it was within those dark corners that the flickers of light just waited to be found. As I nestled down on that soothing evening, the comfort of the day wrapping around me like a tender embrace, my heart no longer raced with uncertainty. Instead, it thrummed steadily in a newfound harmony, a gentle cadence whispering that whatever came next would be worth every step taken. And perhaps, just perhaps, the next message would not carry an admonition to hide but an invitation to explore, breathe, and embrace this beautiful tapestry of existence we continued to weave together. It was during one of those sunny Saturday mornings, where the golden light streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the coffee maker and the half-eaten croissants on the table, that I found myself embroiled in an unexpected argument with my sister, Anna. I had always thought of my sister as a free spirit, the kind of person who danced to her own tune, but that morning revealed a side of her I struggled to comprehend. Anna had recently moved to a small, picturesque town after marrying a local artist, and this new life appeared to be flourishing in its own quirky way. We were enjoying our usual brunch when she casually revealed her plans for her 5-year-old daughter, Molly. "I think it's really important for her to be immersed in her heritage, you know? I want her to learn Spanish, to speak it fluently before English," she said, as she sipped her herbal tea, her expression blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within me. I paused mid-bite, a piece of croissant almost falling from my lips as my fork hovered between the plate and my mouth. But why not both? I asked, incredulous. It's a great idea to be bilingual, but why skip English? This is America, she'll need that language to thrive. Anna looked at me as if I had just suggested burning her favorite art piece. Why is teaching her English so critical? Spanish is part of our identity. I want her to embrace that. It was the kind of statement that cut deeper than I anticipated, and I felt a flicker of anger rising in my chest. You know what, Anna? You're insane if you think this is going to work out. You're limiting her future for the sake of cultural stubbornness. The air thickened with tension, the clinking of plates becoming the only sound filling the silence between us as I realized I had crossed a line. There was a moment, just a fragile glimpse, where I could see the hurt in her eyes, and for the first time, I worried that I might lose my sister to something bigger than I could fathom. The two of us, sitting across from each other in that sun-drenched kitchen, felt as if we were standing on opposite shores of a growing chasm. I chased away the rising guilt with a sharp breath, but it only intensified. Anna didn't respond right away. Instead, she set her teacup down with deliberate care, as if to gather her thoughts. The hurt morphed into quieter frustration. You think English is the only way she can succeed, that language alone defines her capabilities? You should know better than anyone how important it is for me to raise her, not just in one culture but in many. I struggled to understand her perspective. True, our upbringing had been steeped in the traditions of our Spanish-speaking family, but this was different. This was an entirely isolated approach to raising a child. Anna, it's not just about language, it's about breaking down barriers in society, especially in this digital age, I reasoned. What will happen when she tries to engage with her peers? She can have that heritage without shutting out other avenues. Her face tightened, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she responded, I'm not shutting anything out. I'm opening doors to her roots, and if you can't see the importance of that, then I don't know what to say. I felt the prick of tears in my eyes, frustration mixed with my instinct to defend not only my view but the future of a child I adored. The brunch devolved into an awkward silence punctuated only by the quiet whir of a fan in the corner, and with each passing second, I feared we were creating a rift that would never heal. I finally broke the silence. I just don't want you to mess this up, Anna. She deserves the best of both worlds. I couldn't read her expression. It was like peering into a fog. She sighed deeply and stood up, indicating brunch was over. Maybe you don't understand parenting as I do, and that's okay, but we have different views, and you're not going to change my mind, she said, her voice steady yet filled with a sadness I felt deep in my own heart. As I left her house that day, I felt a multitude of emotions swirling inside me, guilt, concern, and confusion. Were my intentions right, or had I imposed my own fears onto her parenting style instead of supporting her choices? In the weeks that followed, I distanced myself, trying to think through the layers of our conversation while giving her the time she needed. Yet, messages went unanswered, calls were left unreturned, and soon, I felt like a ghost haunting the corners of her new life. Days turned into weeks, and I watched from afar as Anna shared snippets of Molly's milestones on social media. Photos showed her twirling in a dress, speaking to her friends exclusively in Spanish, interspersed with family gatherings where laughter and warmth were evident. Yet still, there was an absence I couldn't shake. I missed being part of something so vital. The turning point came when I received a surprise text from Anna one afternoon. Can you come over? Molly wants to share something with you. I felt a surge of hope and anxiety as I drove to her house. Once there, I saw Molly sitting cross-legged on the floor, her bright eyes lighting up when she spotted me. Auntie, I want to show you my new story. I wrote it in Spanish. Her enthusiasm was infectious. She pulled out a crayon and paper, presenting a series of drawings alongside Spanish words. Overwhelmed with emotion, I took a seat beside her, helping to read the words as she beamed with pride. In that moment, I could see how my sister's choice was shaping her daughter's identity. Yes, the importance of balance remained essential to me, but this was not the end of the world I feared it would be, it was a beginning. I turned to Anna, who was watching us with a soft smile, clearly happy to see our bond rekindle. You know, maybe I miscalculated, but Molly should learn everything she can, I confessed. I guess you're not insane, after all. Just passionate. Anna laughed, a joyful sound that filled the air. Let's teach her English together, shall we? As we sat together, sketching bilingual stories alongside a bright girl full of dreams, I felt a weight lift. It was in this shared experience that I realized understanding often grows from the seeds of difference, and sometimes, the best way to support someone you love is to embrace their choices, even when the logic of it doesn't fully resonate. In the months that passed, we built bridges back to each other, teaching Molly the values of her heritage and the languages of the world. And while we might not have agreed on everything, that day marked the beginning of a journey, one where we would each learn the language of love, compassion, and acceptance anew. Update: a month later, Anna sent me a video of Molly confidently reciting a children's song in both Spanish and English. She was proud, and so was I. We had found a balance together, and our family felt more united than ever. I knew, without a doubt, that every shade of culture and every word woven together contributes to a tapestry worth cherishing, one that we would continue to nurture hand in hand. As the weeks rolled on after that pivotal day, it felt like a weight had been lifted not just from Anna's shoulders but from our entire family. The tension that had once loomed over our gatherings evaporated, replaced by laughter and warmth that echoed through our living room during those weekend visits. I remember one particular Saturday vividly. The sun shone bright through the kitchen window as Anna prepared an elaborate brunch, her hands busy mixing batter for pancakes while the faint sound of children's laughter danced in the air. Molly, with her little apron tied around her waist, was beaming as she helped her mom, her small fingers smudged with flour, following along in a spattering of Spanish and English. Anna had started incorporating both languages into their routine, making it a fun game instead of an obligation. I watched them together, my heart swelling with joy at how far we had come. I had made it a point to join in and read picture books with Molly, choosing stories that were beautifully rich in both languages, and encouraging her to express her thoughts freely about them, as if we were weaving together our own little storytelling sessions soaked in bilingual charm. Yet, despite these nurturing moments, I still grappled with lingering worries about Anna's earlier stance on language. The implications of what had happened hung around like an old ghost. I often found myself questioning whether we'd truly harmonized our approach or if this newfound balance was temporary, a gentle breeze during a fragile season. One evening, after a family dinner filled with discussions and dreams, I felt compelled to broach that topic with Anna once more. We settled on the worn couch, the evening calming us into a cozy stillness as I leaned into the conversation. Do you ever think about how your perspective has changed? About all the things you once believed? I asked gently, taking care to keep my tone inviting. She paused, her brow furrowed in thought. I do, she finally said, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. I realize now that I was so desperate to hold on to our heritage, to shield her from the chaos of navigating two worlds, that I forgot how beautiful it could be to embrace both. It's like I was seeing a colorful sunrise through a foggy window. Her words struck me, resonating deeply. Our discussion flowed effortlessly as Anna shared how she had once feared that introducing English might dilute their vibrant Spanish traditions, but now she saw it as a way to enhance them. I admired her willingness to grow, to recognize that the act of sharing languages could amplify their family bond rather than divide it. This was indeed a lesson in resilience and love. I could see it shimmering in her eyes, a twinkle that hinted at a fresh beginning. As we spoke, the world outside seemed to fade away, the evening air soothing and infused with the scent of lingering spices from dinner. We reminisced about our childhood, the laughter, the chaos, the little moments that reminded us of why family was so important. It all felt so raw and real, like a warmth spreading through my veins. As we concluded our heartfelt late-night talk, something in me felt lighter, like the fog was finally lifting in my own perception of our family dynamics. A few weeks later, my phone buzzed while I was having my morning coffee. It was another video from Anna. I pressed play, and there was our little Molly again, this time standing proudly on a small makeshift stage, a stuffed bear in her arms as she sang a medley of both languages, her voice sweet and innocent. The audience? Her dolls lined up as if they were the most enthusiastic fans in the world. Look, it's our bilingual superstar. Anna texted alongside the video. Tears brimmed in my eyes as I watched the pure joy radiating from her tiny frame. Little did we realize it then, but we weren't merely teaching Molly, she was teaching us right back how to live freely within a melting pot of culture and language. You see, each day became a chance not just to express ourselves but to intertwine our journeys and uplift one another in the simplest yet most profound of ways. And now, as the memory of that vibrant Saturday whirled through my mind, I realized how much that journey had changed me too. Anna and I had discovered something precious, that communication and understanding go far beyond words. They were the true essence of family, of our shared stories, and the love that bound us tighter than any language ever could. I felt a sense of fulfillment as I recalled our earlier struggles, now merely stepping stones in the sprawling path of our family's narrative. Life may continue to throw challenges our way, but with each passing day, we would face them together, weaving the tapestry of language, love, and acceptance, even stronger. And perhaps one day, I would find the courage to share with Anna how inspiring this journey has been for me, how in cherishing both languages, we have built a legacy of love that I hope Molly passes on, in whichever language her heart chooses to sing. As the days gradually turned into weeks, our family dynamic transformed in ways I never fully anticipated. Evenings, once marked by tension and miscommunication, became vibrant sessions filled with laughter and playful banter, where the rhythmic cadences of both Spanish and English flowed freely around the dining table. Molly's bright smile seemed to radiate warmth as she whimsically switched between languages, eagerly explaining her day to us in a delightful mix that left Anna and me chuckling, wondering in awe at the incredible adaptability of a child's mind. There were moments, like when we jointly read her favorite story, the familiar characters dancing off the pages in both languages, that deepened my understanding of how multifaceted childhood can be, revealing layers of creativity and imagination I had always regarded as intangible until I witnessed it bloom before my eyes. Yet, woven into this delicate tapestry were the threads of occasional misunderstandings. For instance, during a family gathering, Molly inadvertently called her cousin a taco, meaning silly in Spanish, while aiming for the English word goof, sending the whole room into a fit of laughter, but also sparking a hushed moment of confusion as the adults exchanged bemused glances. It was these small mishaps that reminded us of the beautiful chaos interlaced through language learning, an essence not just of acquiring words, but also of forging connections despite missteps. I found myself reflecting on our own childhood lives as I watched Molly interact. Anna and I had faced our share of complexity, each entangled in our unique cultural roots, yet we had always hoped to unite those roots for her, not recognizing at first that our differences were exactly what could bring us closer together. One serene Sunday afternoon, while seated on the patio with my sketchbook brimming with wildflowers, I decided to pen a letter to Anna, one that expressed my gratitude for her resilience, for embracing the quirks of our evolving family dynamics, and for the lessons I had learned through her determination to keep our heritage alive in Molly's heart. It felt vital to communicate my thoughts, hoping to illuminate the bond we were growing not just as sisters, but as allies in this journey of parenthood. With each word, I sought to capture the essence of our melding cultures, striving to refine my expressions, oftentimes whispering them gently to the wind before transferring them on paper, hoping they carried the warmth of my affection. Once the letter was complete, I read it to myself, letting the sentiments wash over me like a soothing balm. When I finally shared it with Anna, her eyes widened, sparkled, and then softened, gratitude spilling from her voice as she hugged me tightly, almost as if the weight of our prior disagreement slipped away along with her exhale. In time, I gathered the courage to voice my thoughts about how this journey had helped me learn to appreciate all shades of language, an awakening that fueled newfound passion within myself, whispering to Anna how our commitment to communicate with love and understanding had reshaped the very fabric of our family. We agreed that we were forging a unique identity, nestled between our cultures, where the love we shared cared less about keeping score on which language was spoken when, and more about the emotional resonance behind every word, how a simple gracias could hold as much heart as thank you. This perspective brought us further together, allowing me to breathe easier in the warm embrace of our joint aspirations for Molly. As the seasons shifted, I often caught glimpses of Molly giggling with her friends, blending her playful banter, reminiscent of a little polyglot conquering the world with every cheerful note. One particularly vibrant afternoon, she elatedly invited her friends over for an impromptu language day in our backyard, where they huddled around crayons and paper, inspiration struck, and a flurry of illustrations of their favorite things burst forth, words fluttering between language borders like butterflies setting free. It struck me in that moment how these budding relationships would someday define her place in the world, building bridges and embracing differences with an open heart. I felt something shift inside, a blossoming of hope and a profound commitment to being a supportive figure in her life, as I knew deeply that no matter where her journey led her, we would be there as her unwavering support. Looking back now, the journey we embarked on was not merely about language, it shaped the pillars of our familial relationship, showing us the incredible strength found in vulnerability, teaching us that acceptance isn't always about being right or wrong, but rather about cultivating an environment filled with compassion and open-ended questions, nurturing apples from both our trees, allowing them to grow together in a delightful orchard. Those initial struggles now felt like whispered lullabies, reminding me of the beauty residing within patience, and as I closed my eyes at night, I felt a sense of peace wrap around me like a cozy blanket, grateful for the families we've built through honesty and love, knowing that this was just the beginning of a brighter story unfolding before us. I never expected my career as a mental health therapist would introduce me to something so unsettling, something so beyond my understanding that it would leave an indelible mark on my life. I've spent years working in various clinics, hearing people pour out their fears, anxieties, and traumas, yet I never prepared myself for the day I would meet Drew, my new patient who quite literally lived in a basement. It started on a cloudy Tuesday, just a typical day at the office, when I received an unexpected referral to see a patient in dire need. The organization informed me that the new patient was a young man in his late 20s, living at his parents' house, but the caveat here was that he had taken residence in their damp, dark basement. Perhaps I sensed the curiosity mingling with apprehension as I entered that basement for the first time, descending the rickety stairs under the dim light fixture that flickered ominously. When I first laid eyes on Drew, sitting curled up in the worn armchair littered with mismatched blankets and half-finished novels, he didn't seem out of place at all. He looked like one of those characters, deeply intriguing, yet profoundly damaged. As we started our sessions, I learned more about him. His voice was soft yet unwavering, full of wisdom that belied his years. Drew revealed he was an aspiring writer, but his creativity was stifled not only by his crippling anxiety but a family history riddled with mental health struggles that seemed to hover over him like a thick fog. The reason he confined himself to the basement was twofold. 1, he felt safer from his overbearing parents, and 2, it had become a sanctuary where he could tiptoe along the fragile line between reality and his vivid imagination. Slowly, week after week, he unspooled the terrible tapestry of his life, and with every session, I felt more connected to him. I, too, grappled with a blend of empathy and unease, wondering if I was genuinely offering him the help he needed or simply peering into a disquieting parallel of my own existence. His stories had begun to weave themselves into my mind, and a mysterious bond developed between us, shrouded in mutual vulnerability and unspoken truths. In my gut, though, a nagging doubt began to creep in: had I crossed an unspoken line? The basement was replete with shadows that twisted and turned in an unsettling dance, and as I opened the door to leave every session, I felt as if I was stepping into a realm that was both captivating and deeply forbidding. One week, as Drew recounted a particularly harrowing tale about a character of his creation that mirrored his struggles, his energy shifted. There was something in his eyes then, a flicker, maybe of madness or sheer genius. It was hard to tell. I found myself holding my breath, sensing that I had stumbled into a fracture of his soul I wasn't fully prepared for. He mentioned a night he felt compelled to protect himself, drawn into a world where he blurred the lines between fiction and reality. He spoke of the basement in such vivid detail that I almost believed it concealed a world of its own. The conversation lingered like an echo in my mind, unsettling and captivating, and as we closed our session, he handed me a yellowed piece of paper filled with scrawled notes and sketches. "It's a character chart for my next story," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "But it's more than that, it's about me." I felt like a voyeur peering at the fragile flaps of his psyche exposed, and I saw visions of that basement, full of shadows, solace, and maybe something sinister, a vessel for both creativity and torment. In the days that followed, I found myself lost in thought about the stories he told and the meanings hidden beneath his words. One rainy evening, driven by impulse, I decided to venture to his home once more, convinced to understand the space that shaped Drew. As I approached the house, its haunted facade loomed in the dim light. The cracks in the walls seemed to mirror the fractures within the man I had been trying to help. I knocked nervously, and his mother opened the door with a distant look in her eyes, as if too lost in her own thoughts to notice my presence. She led me down to the basement without a word, and once again, I was swept into that dim world filled with shadows and silence. Drew was seated exactly where I'd last seen him, yet there was an air of something different, a thick silence that hung between us like a taut string about to break. He offered me the chair, but I hesitated, suddenly aware that the weight of the room had shifted. "How did you even know to come here?" he asked, his tone low, almost cautious. I explained my worry, my need to understand him better, but the moment my voice faltered, I felt the unease ripple through the space. Something was wrong. That paper he'd handed me was not merely character sketches, they were intricate maps, ones I had overlooked. I leaned closer, trying to absorb every detail, my heart racing as I realized they depicted not just his stories but a labyrinth that mirrored his mind, a prison where his fears came to life. "Drew," I began, my voice quaking, "is there something else you need to share?" He looked up then, his eyes wide as if a veil had been lifted, revealing something buried deep. "I was trying to escape it," he confessed, his hand shaking slightly. "The basement, my mind, it's all the same." And there it was, the roots of his anxiety twisted into the mere act of climbing stairs, as if the very act of going beyond those four walls would unravel the stories he encapsulated. The moment we stood there, surrounded by the artifacts of his life, I realized I was standing at the precipice of something profound. I couldn't help but feel that we had both stepped into a world where compassion danced with darkness, where understanding intertwined with fear. I left that night, my mind racing with thoughts of our conversation, infuriated with myself. I had come seeking answers but found more questions, knots of confusion wrapping deeper around my heart. In the weeks that followed, our sessions transformed. I learned as much from him as he from me. I began to see that the basement was not just a physical space but a realm for healing, a canvas for his creativity and his pain, pushing me deeper into my own fears about boundaries and the nature of care. As I continued to support him in constructing bridges back to the wider world, I realized that sometimes from the deepest shadows, creativity can bloom. What initially seemed a prison became a place of liberation in Drew's mind. Drew eventually moved out of that basement, transitioning into his own apartment, but he never fully left that space behind. Occasionally, I find a bolt of vivid inspiration in his stories. They resonate in me like echoes of a song forgotten. The basement was an invitation to ponder how darkness and light can coalesce, shaping our narratives in ways we might never anticipate. Months later, I returned for one last session, filled with pride and bittersweet nostalgia. As we closed the door behind us, I realized we had woven a tapestry of healing from the threads of his fears. Drew offered me a handwritten letter before I left, expressing thanks that resonated with the warmth shared in those moments, leaving me with a heart full of wonder for the stories that define us. I don't know if I'll ever truly untangle the threads of our journey, but maybe, just maybe, those tales will continue to twist and turn through the shadows, guiding others home. The basement may have held its secrets, but our shared journey had birthed an unexpected friendship, reminding me that healing often blooms in the unlikeliest of places. And as I walked away, I felt an odd sense of closure, both for him and for myself, marveling at how connections can shift the boundaries of understanding. Somehow, through all the chaos, a sense of hope emerged. Life moves forward, often in the quietest of ways, from the shadows of our deepest fears. As I stepped out of that dimly lit basement for the last time, the scent of damp earth and stale memories clung to my clothes, a reminder of all that had transpired within the confines of those four walls. The late afternoon sun poured down, warm and inviting, contrasting sharply with the chill of the basement I'd just emerged from. It felt surreal, leaving behind a world that had unfolded so intricately, yet contained within such a compact space. I glanced back at the windowless facade, wondering how many secrets it still held, and how many more stories could be carved from its shadowy existence. My mind drifted to Jacob, the patient who had inadvertently become my confidant, revealing pieces of himself that seemed more like fragments of a puzzle than complete thoughts. Every session had brought its own revelations, but it was during our last visit that I learned the most about him, not through his words, but through the silence that lingered between us. In that silence, I realized the burden he carried. It wasn't merely the shame of his living conditions or the burden of his past that weighed him down, but the profound loneliness that accompanied his struggle. We had both used therapy to weave a thread of understanding, but perhaps it was more than that. It had become our lifeline in a stormy sea of isolation. It was that very humanity that connected us, more genuine than any scripted psychobabble. Even after our sessions ended, his voice echoed in my thoughts, especially his final words, which felt like both a closure and an invitation. "We're all just stories waiting to be told," he had said, a slight smile breaking the heavy gravity of his usual demeanor. I had left him with an assurance that he would never be alone again in this, that I would carry his story with me, sharing it in my own therapeutic journey. The ride home was filled with a medley of emotions swirling in my chest. I drove through the streets, watching life unfold in front of me, a chaotic dance that seemed so vibrant compared to the stillness I had just left behind. Children rode their bicycles, adults chatted idly on sidewalks, and the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. It struck me that everyone carried their own hidden struggles, akin to Jacob's. I could see snippets of their own stories passing by. The thought made me reflect on the inevitability of connection and how lives intertwine, often without first realizing our shared burdens. Late that evening, after a simple dinner of takeout sushi, I found myself drawn to my journal, compelled to somehow capture the essence of Jacob's journey. As I scribbled, I felt the weight of each word, the importance of preserving both his vulnerability and strength. I wrote about the laughter we shared, how he revealed fragments of his past in the safety of our sessions, the way he cracked jokes about his ex-girlfriends who lived in the realm of his memories, and how he took each poke of humor as a sliver to cut through his despair. With every stroke of the pen, I felt a release. I was processing his story while weaving it with my own appreciation for the resilience of the human spirit. In the weeks that followed, I kept Jacob in my thoughts more than I had anticipated. Each day seemed to bring a new layer to my understanding of what it meant to acknowledge someone's struggles and how much healing could stem from this acknowledgement. I had begun to reach out, sharing snippets of his journey at professional gatherings, using his anonymity wisely but ensuring his message was clear. Sometimes, hope is found in the most unexpected places, I would say, letting my colleagues know that each patient holds a labyrinth of experiences waiting to be navigated. As I moved through the rhythms of my life, the moments of doubt and worry echoed the earlier feelings of uncertainty I'd felt before meeting Jacob. It made me wonder if I was truly helping others in my practice, or merely dancing around the fringes of healing. But every time I remembered Jacob's laugh, that clear, light laugh that echoed in the depths of despair, I knew then that every patient had their own story, a narrative that deserved to be heard and, at times, passed forward. And so, I learned to walk with a lighter heart, carrying Jacob's strength alongside my professional insights. It was a role we both had unknowingly embraced. I was his watcher and he was my guide. As the boundaries blurred, I realized that each connection I made afterward felt richer, more vibrant, echoing the lessons I had learned in that basement. Months passed, and while I never stopped checking in on him, the visits dwindled. His progress had become a blossoming journey of his own. One evening, just as the winter frost began to settle in, I received a message from him. It was a simple image, a photo of himself standing outside a brightened door, grinning into the camera. I got a place above ground, it read, just a tiny studio with a view of the stars. In that moment, my heart soared with pride. Perhaps the stories held within our shadows weren't meant to disappear, after all. Instead, they became guides, reminding us that, together, we could traverse even the darkest of paths, eventually finding the light. The days that followed that heartfelt message felt lighter, almost as if the chill of winter was merely a backdrop to the warmth blossoming within me. As a therapist, I'd always known that change was possible, but witnessing it firsthand in someone so close to the edge of despair was different. It was invigorating, a testament to the human spirit's resilience. Encouraged by his message, I found myself reflecting on our sessions together, how his quiet determination had sparked something deep within me. He'd shared stories of his past, his childhood and dreams, woven with threads of despair that had once held him captive in that dim basement. Yet somehow, he had begun to untangle those knots, seeking a life beyond the confines of the life he'd constructed. I wanted to see him thrive in his new world, to bask in the glow of his hard-fought freedom. I put aside my research for the day, eager to reach out and arrange a visit. When the day finally came, I felt an unusual mixture of excitement and nervousness, a tangible thrill coursing through my veins as I rang the doorbell of his new place. The tiny studio indeed had a view of the stars, twinkling brilliantly against the velvet night sky, and it felt miraculous to stand in this space that smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. When he opened the door, the joy in his eyes mirrored the vastness above. "Welcome to my new chapter," he said, his voice steady, yet laced with an undercurrent of disbelief. We spent hours talking about his transition, the spooky stories he had filled our sessions with, and how he was learning to embrace both the light and dark within himself. The vulnerability we shared deepened our bond beautifully. I was no longer just his therapist but a friend, a confidant. As the night wore on, he took me to the small balcony where we could see the stars in all their glory. He pointed to one specific star that shone brighter than the others, calling it his milestone star, a symbol of his journey toward healing. I stood beside him, aware that my heart was expanding with every word we exchanged. It was during those moments of genuine connection, immersed in laughter and shared silence, that I realized how much his struggle had mirrored my own. As a therapist, I had also escaped the shadows, my own fears of inadequacy and the burden of expectations plaguing my mind. Being present with him allowed me to confront my own journey, helping me understand that healing happens collectively as much as it does individually. After what felt like both an eternity and a fleeting instant, the chill of the night crept in, and we both knew it was time for me to go. However, just before I left, he grabbed my arm gently. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." I felt a lump in my throat but managed to smile, grateful for the role I had played in his transformation. As I headed home, I couldn't shake the feeling of euphoria lifting my spirits higher. I had walked with him through his shadows, and now, I looked forward to witnessing the glow of his newfound hope light up his world. Not long after, I received another message from him. "I feel like I can take on anything now," he shared, mixed with pictures of him smiling with new friends in a local cafe. I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming pride swell within me. But as the weeks unfolded, I realized that there was still a lot of work to be done, not on his part, but on mine. I began to understand that sharing my own struggles could help others, just as I had seen him blossoming without the constraints of his past fears. And as winter melted into a warmer spring, I started to pen my own stories, some connected to my journey as a therapist, others reflecting my personal challenges. I found an unexpected community online, and in sharing, I diminished the power of those shadows that often tried to creep back in. While he stepped into life above ground, I was taking my own journey into the light. Together, we became beacons of hope, finding solace in our shared vulnerabilities and kindness for each other's pain. As we continued to share updates, our conversations illuminated the understanding that healing didn't have a finish line. It was messy, complex, and defined by moments of triumph and despair, but embracing those moments in our lives could lead not just to personal growth, but also to connection. So, when I reflect back on that basement and the struggles that transpired, I now see it as a sacred ground, one that birthed friendship, understanding, and the profound realization that the stories we carry don't just belong to us, they are threads woven into the fabric of humanity itself, binding us in our shared experiences. And sometimes, just sometimes, they bring us the light we so desperately seek. I never thought a simple dinner would unravel the delicate web of my family's dynamics, but that's exactly what happened one fateful evening when my mom's boyfriend, Todd, crossed a line I thought was unimaginable. I've always taken pride in being the rational one in the family, calm, collected, and a fierce protector of the boundaries I believe should never be crossed. My mom had met Todd about 6 months prior, and while I was initially supportive, I gradually grew uneasy. Todd was charming in that way that feels forced, often masking what I couldn't quite place. My gut instinct screamed that his charisma was more a facade than anything genuine. On the night in question, dinner was supposed to be just pasta and garlic bread, a simple affair to celebrate my mom's birthday. The air was thick with the warmth of nostalgia as my mom smiled at the table, her cheeks glowing like the candles flickering nearby. I didn't understand the palpable tension until Todd made an offhand comment about my weight, something he couched in concern, but struck me like a lightning bolt. "You know, if you cut out carbs, you might feel a lot better," he said, chuckling lightly, looking directly at me as though he were giving wise, unsolicited advice. My fork clattered onto the plate as I momentarily lost my voice, the blood rushing to my ears muffling the light-hearted chatter of the other guests around us. I could see my mom's eyes widen with embarrassment and horror, yet her defensiveness seemed to evaporate in the air, as though she were mourning the loss of the good time rather than standing up for me. The tension wrapped around my throat like a noose, and as Todd continued to make jocular remarks about my youthful resilience, I felt my whole body flush with anger. I excused myself to the bathroom, but I didn't need the time to breathe, I needed an exit strategy. I found myself peering at my reflection and wondering why I wasn't capable of standing up for myself. I raced back to the table, determined to reclaim the narrative, ready to carve out a semblance of respect I thought Todd had stripped from me. I didn't know what sparked it, but I decided enough was enough. With my heart pounding, I tapped my glass to gather the attention of the room. "You can't speak to people like that and expect to be welcomed into this family," I stated, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside me. The air crackled with disbelief and silence engulfed us. Todd's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, I saw anger flicker across his face, but before he could retort, my mother intervened. "There's no need for this," she trailed off weakly, her gaze darting between Todd and me. Maybe we should just relax? It's my birthday, after all." But I could feel my resolve solidifying, a growing realization that I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore, I was fighting for my mom, too. The weight of the evening hung heavily in the air, and I finally spoke with clarity. "Hey, Todd, if you can't treat me or anyone here with respect, you should leave." Time held its breath before a stunned silence shattered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, caught off guard. My mom didn't say a word, she just looked at me, a mix of pride and concern dancing across her features, but all I could feel was an overwhelming sense of satisfaction and relief. To my surprise, Todd stood up, muttered something under his breath describing my decision as childish and immature, and stormed out. The air felt lighter in his absence, and though my mom seemed torn, I knew I had crossed a bridge that would change the contours of our family forever. The aftermath was full of raw emotions. My mom and I had long talks about what it meant to be supportive versus enabling, And while our relationship became a tapestry filled with unresolved threads, it also blossomed into something more honest. I learned that being an adult sometimes means cultivating boundaries even with the ones we love. I found my bravery in vulnerability, and it felt exhilarating. Looking back, I often wonder if I truly was the asshole for kicking him out or if he was the one posing as family. I can't say for sure, but I do know that intervening in that moment set the stage for a more authentic partnership between my mom and me, where both of us could feel safe in expressing our truths, unfiltered and free from the poison of unrealistic expectations. Months later, after the dust finally settled, I discovered my mom and I were navigating life together more openly. I realized an unexpected truth: standing up for myself meant standing up for her, too. As for Todd, he became a fleeting shadow of our past, often discussed but never missed, an echo of lessons learned in the most trying of circumstances. In the end, perhaps my query of AITA has more to do with growth than judgment, and I think we both needed that moment more than we realized. Months flowed into each other in a way that felt almost dreamlike, with each moment teaching us something profound and bittersweet about ourselves and the bonds we shared. The initial sting of uncertainty I had felt after kicking Todd out of our home faded into something softer, a gentle reminder of resilience. My relationship with my mom morphed into something I never thought possible. It was as if we had cracked open a door that had long been shut, revealing an entire room of possibilities. My mornings were no longer engulfed in tension. Waking up to a quiet house felt safe, familiar, and comforting. We developed a routine that involved long cups of coffee shared and the soft sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, mornings filled with laughter over half-baked plans for the day. Sometimes we'd simply sit in silence, and the warmth of companionship filled any gaps that words left behind. Each weekend became an opportunity for bonding. We would embark on spontaneous trips to the nearby farmer's market or spend lazy afternoons browsing through old bookstores, laughing over battered copies of novels we never intended to read but always found irresistible. We were healing together, and it became apparent that standing up to Todd had ignited a spark in both of us, encouraging vulnerability and strength in equal measure. During one particularly sunny afternoon, as we nestled into our favorite corner of the local cafe, my mom gently broached the subject of dating again, her cheeks faintly flushed with uncertainty. I felt a wave of protectiveness wash over me. Todd had left his mark on our lives, but I didn't want to let that shadow stay. She spoke of wanting companionship, the simple joys of sharing a meal with someone who wasn't mired in the complexities of past heartaches. I let her words settle within me, recognizing the importance of her desires. It was a reflection of rebirth, not only for her but for both of us. I could hear in her voice a note of hope, one that was contagious. So, I encouraged her to dip her toes back into the dating pool, enjoying the romantic rides of life instead of cowering in fear of what might come. Those discussions led to other confessions, revealing our dreams, our fears, and the haunted remnants of our shared history, including how Todd had twisted us in knots of guilt and control. However, it wasn't all perfect, of course. There were moments when uncomfortable truths reared their heads, like the time my mom had mentioned she ran into Todd at the grocery store, and my stomach had churned at the mere thought. Memories could be both heavy and light, and navigating them felt akin to walking a tightrope, balancing the urge to protect her and allowing her the freedom to forge her own path. We managed the anxiety that brewed between us with deep conversations, ensuring that our newfound bond didn't fall prey to the traditional parent-child roles of expectation but grew into something fluid and mutual instead. As time rolled on, Todd's presence became less of an open wound and more of a distant memory, salted yet healing. Discussing him now felt more like reminiscing about an old storm than grappling with its aftermath. Looking back, the confusion had morphed into clarity, the kind that made it easy to breathe again. I realized that the question of whether I was the asshole was as intricate and layered as the relationships we nurture. It had never been about placing blame but rather about making choices that resonate with the essence of who we are becoming. I pondered long and hard about how far we had come since that chaotic moment of clarity. Each step we took towards understanding ourselves was a flower blooming in the light of truth. Perhaps the most remarkable evolution was when my mom unexpectedly invited me to her first date with someone she'd met through a mutual friend. The invitation was bittersweet, a full-circle moment that mirrored all we had built together. I watched her prepare with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, carefully selecting an outfit that reflected both her newfound spirit and careful consideration. And as she left that evening, confidence in her step and an infectious smile on her face, I felt a swell of pride so potent it nearly overwhelmed me. I wasn't just standing up for her but also encouraging her to stand tall for herself. In the quiet of our home that night, I found comfort in knowing that we could support each other, no longer confined by shadows, but instead illuminated by honest growth. As I climbed into bed, I thought about that question, am I the asshole? And smiled softly to myself. We were human, we stumbled and learned, and through it all, we had found a vibrant thread of connection that knitted us together despite the chaos that tried to pull us apart. As dreams began to weave their way into my consciousness, I felt a whisper of contentment guiding me gently to sleep, surrounded by the soft glow of hope for both our futures. The days that followed felt unusually bright, a stark contrast to the cloud of unease that had loomed over our lives since Todd entered the picture. I could see it in my mom's eyes, a flicker of renewed spirit coursing through her as she began to rediscover parts of herself previously buried beneath layers of obligation and disappointment. We started sharing more, little moments turned into deep conversations, brunches turned into full-day adventures. One Saturday, we ventured to our favorite spot by the lake, a place that had been a backdrop for both cherished memories and silent tensions. As we sat by the water, the sun casting shimmering reflections across the surface, I felt a warmth growing inside my chest. Remember when we used to come here every summer? You always said the ducks could talk if you listened closely enough, I said, a playful glint in my eye. My mom laughed, a joyous sound that felt freeing. I think they've got a lot to say, she replied, especially about that Todd character. The laughter that erupted between us was like a balm, soothing wounds I hadn't realized still existed. Yet, as much as we were improving, there were moments when the past would come crashing back like waves against the shore. I would occasionally catch flashes of sorrow in her expression, remnants of guilt or perhaps loss, when she glanced at an old photograph of our family that hadn't been put away yet. One evening, while we were organizing some boxes in the attic, I found an old journal of hers, filled with entries that painted a portrait of her life before Todd, before her loneliness manifested in desperation. I delicately placed it in front of her and said, "This seems like a memory worth revisiting." She hesitated, eyes darting across the weathered pages, then opened it slowly, scanning the lines like reliving a dream. I watched the myriad of emotions wash over her face, nostalgia, longing, sadness, but ultimately an understanding. It was a journey through her past that we both needed. As the weeks turned into months, and our relationship learned to navigate uncharted waters, I still found moments of uncertainty. I sometimes wondered if kicking Todd out had been the right thing, lingering thoughts tugging at my conscience in the quiet of the night. Would I regret the choices I made? Or would that fissure have been filled with resentment had I chosen silence? When these thoughts crept in, I would remind myself, as I often did, of the strength we were building together. It wasn't just about removing a person from our lives, it was about regaining ownership of who we were and what we wanted for ourselves. In those quiet nights, as I ruminated on my feelings, I realized how much I had grown through this experience. No longer was I a bystander in my own life, but instead, I was a participant, fully engaged and aware. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat at my desk journaling, I noticed my mom standing at the hallway, hesitating as if she were unsure whether to join me or stay in her own thoughts. I looked up, and when our eyes met, I beckoned her over, encouraging without words. She shuffled over, holding a steaming cup of tea, which she offered with a gentle smile. "I've been thinking," she said, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. "About how I've let fear dictate so much of my life, how I let fear tie me to the wrong people." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "It's time to not just stand up for myself, but to keep actively moving forward. I want to try to embrace more of this life, and I want, even need, you with me on this journey." The sincerity in her words washed over me like a refreshing wave, grounding and real. We dove into an evening of plans and dreams, mapping out what our future could look like beyond the realm of past shadows. We discussed hobbies we had put aside, travels we had always dreamed of, and the importance of forging new connections, both inside and outside our family. As months slipped by, I couldn't help but remember that defining moment when everything began to shift, the pivotal decision that nudged us both out of stagnation and into a new dawn. Our bond became a tapestry woven with both laughter and tears, both the shadows of previous pain and the bright threads of hope. In this space, I found myself gently answering my lingering question every time it fluttered through my mind. Nah, I wasn't the asshole after all. I was simply a person learning how to live authentically alongside another. As I finally drifted off to sleep that night, with thoughts of future adventures suspended in my mind, I felt lighter, anchored not by guilt or fear of judgment, but by an unshakable belief in growth and connection. My dreams took flight with vivid images of laughter and sunlight, creating a canvas of what was to come, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a serene sense of anticipation unfurl within me, a sweet promise of tomorrow and all the possibilities it would bring. It was one of those gray mornings when the world felt like a barely awake dream, and I had just settled into my favorite corner of the couch, coffee cradled in hand, when my phone buzzed with a message that shifted my entire day into a realm of unplanned chaos. My sister, Emily, was in a bind again. My heart sank a little because knowing her, this would not be a small request. She had 2 kids under the age of 5, an energetic whirlwind and a determined toddler, and I loved them both fiercely, though I often felt the weight of responsibility to support her. "Hey, can you watch the kids for a few hours? I've got a last-minute appointment," the text read, and in my mind, I could already picture the screen light illuminating her frazzled expression. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and started weighing my options. I wanted to help Emily, I really did. But I had plans, simple ones, just a day to myself to recharge, something I desperately needed after weeks of emotional labor from work. I sat there, contemplating everything, the guilt of saying no, the responsibility that would flicker into my reality should I agree, and the nagging realization that I hadn't met her needs on countless other occasions. Every time she counted on me, it felt a little more like a betrayal of my own needs if I couldn't deliver, just one more notch in the ever-growing tally of my unreliability. With a heavy sigh, I typed back, "I'm so sorry. I really can't today." The regret washed over me almost instantly, as if the warmth of my coffee had become cold. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again, and I braced myself for the emotional cascade that often followed our brief conversations. "You never can you?" Her response was immediate and cut like glass. I could almost hear the hurt in her voice through the screen. A flood of guilt crashed over me. "That's not fair. I'm trying to take care of myself, too," I replied, my fingers hurried but relating each word slowly, as if negotiating my way through a minefield of familial expectation and personal boundaries. We exchanged a few more texts, each tugging at the strings of obligation and disappointment, until the conversation crumbled into silence. I put my phone aside, but it sat there like a weight on my chest, the consequences of my decision ricocheting in my mind. I knew Emily was overwhelmed, that she felt isolated in her parenting journey, but I also felt a flicker of resentment growing. It wasn't just about her, this was about me, reclaiming my space. As the day rolled on, clouds drifted across the sky outside, matching my indecisiveness. I still felt tinged with guilt, yet a little relief flickered with it, and I tried to settle in, allowing myself to embrace the calm, yet I couldn't shake the familiar thought, am I the asshole here? In the days that followed, Emily stopped texting me as much. I caught glimpses of her life through social media, great family outings I was absent from, playground playdates, motherly milestones. It gnawed at me. Had I really chosen my own comfort over supporting her through her storms? One late afternoon, as autumn leaves began swirling down like soft whispers outside, I decided to confront my feelings. I invited Emily over. When she arrived, I opened the door to a face that mirrored a combination of exhaustion and irritation. The tension hung thick between us like a stubborn spider web. Instead of tiptoeing around our recent distance, I invited her to sit down, poured us some fresh coffee, and admitted how I felt, my fears about not being enough, my struggles with selfishness, and the fatigue that sometimes consumed my every thought. To my surprise, she revealed her own struggles, how isolating parenting could be, how she sometimes felt like she was flailing, and how, in those moments of needing help, she often turned to me simply because I was family. This raw honesty broke the tension in the room, revealing a more profound connection between us than I had first believed. By the end of that conversation, we weren't just siblings discussing obligations, we were 2 people trying to navigate the murky waters of adulthood while balancing the people we loved with the need to care for ourselves. Almost instinctively, we agreed to do better, to lean on each other without judgment, and reshape the lines of expectation into something a bit more fluid. The journey to reforge our relationship wasn't a single moment but rather a series of conversations gently steering us back to empathy and understanding. Weeks passed, and although not every moment was perfect, gradually we learned how to share the load better. Sometimes she would find a babysitter, and I'd take the kids for some weekend fun, and at other times, I took a step back when I needed, trusting that Emily could lean on other friends or resources as well. In reflection, I found that prioritizing my own space did not make me an antagonist in Emily's story, but rather a supportive character learning how to also embrace vulnerability. Recently, she sent me a text that read, "Thanks for being so you," which filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected. Not an update of resentment, but one of acknowledgement and love. There are still days where that same guilt creeps back in, where I wonder if there's a balance I haven't struck, But I've found peace in knowing we're both trying, and perhaps that's enough in our labyrinth of life. As I settled into bed that night, the soft glow of my bedside lamp casting a calming light over the stacks of books lining my shelves, I reflected on the journey I had taken with my sister, Emily. That text she sent a few days ago, "Thanks for being so you," felt like a lifeline thrown to me in the turbulent waters of familial expectations and personal limitations. It was a stark contrast to the earlier exchanges we had, when my attempts to carve out my own space in life often clashed with what she deemed necessary, especially as a single mother juggling the demands of work and parenting. I thought back to the times when my refusal to step in as a backup babysitter left her frustrated, and I could almost feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. But how could I have been her safety net when my own foundation felt shaky, working through my goals while navigating an ever-evolving sense of self? I learned that while my role was to support, it wasn't to stretch myself so thin that it risked fraying everything I had worked so hard to build. As the light of day dimmed, I listened to the soft hum of the world outside my window, a calming backdrop that echoed my thoughts. Each car that passed, each distant bark from a neighbor's dog, reminded me of the life swirling around me, full of responsibilities and the comforting chaos of family ties. Despite my internal struggles, I tried my best to communicate with Emily, to be honest about where I was emotionally. I remembered the awkward but necessary heart-to-heart we had, sitting on her living room couch surrounded by crayon drawings and scattered toys, an oasis of her life's beautiful mess. I could almost laugh at how we both fumbled with our words, wanting to express our love without resentment spilling out, but eventually, the floodgates opened, and we found grounding in mutual support. Our relationship became a tapestry woven with understanding and adjustment. Each thread was a decision not made in haste but rather inspired by the hope that our bond could foster growth in both our lives. I couldn't always be the safety net she hoped for, but I was willing to be her cheering section, the one who brought a batch of homemade cookies when she was drowning in laundry or offered to listen to her rants about an exhausting day, reminding her to breathe through it. That text was more than gratitude. It felt like we were negotiating contracts of care instead of burdens of obligation, which was liberating in its own right. Now that tranquility rested in the acknowledgement of our roles, I felt lighter despite the hints of apprehension that occasionally lingered in my heart. Closing my eyes, I drifted into a dream where we freely shared laughter and affection without the shadows of guilt haunting our corners. It was both nurturing and freeing, a reminder that as we navigate our labyrinth, it could be filled with the joy of discovery rather than the weight of expectations. Whenever I woke to whispers of doubt, I'd pull that text from the recesses of my memory. "Thanks for being so you." It became my mantra, a gentle nudge to remind me that sometimes, just being there authentically is enough to stitch the frayed edges of our connection back together. And perhaps, in the quiet lessons learned through this journey, we both were becoming stronger characters in our intertwined stories, navigating the winding paths and discovering the beauty in our vulnerabilities. As I settled into this newfound understanding of our relationship, I began to embrace the small moments between Emily and me with a deeper appreciation. It was during one of these moments, a lazy Sunday afternoon, that I found myself sprawled out on the couch, a warm mug of chamomile tea cradled in my hands while rain pattered softly against the window. Emily had come over with her daughter, 4-year-old Mia, a lively bundle of energy who could simultaneously brighten the room and leave it in delightful chaos. Mia, with her wild curls bouncing and eyes sparkling with curiosity, flitted around, exploring the various knickknacks that adorned my shelves. I watched her from my cozy spot, a gentle smile on my face, as Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers moving skillfully to thread colorful beads onto string for an arts and crafts project they had spontaneously decided upon. The dull thrum of guilt that had followed me like a shadow began to dissipate as my sister and her daughter filled the living room with laughter. Emily glanced up occasionally, her expression soft with gratitude as if to say, "Thank you for opening your space to us." I could see the way Mia's cheeks glowed with excitement and how careful she was in choosing the next bead, pondering the shades and textures with an artist's precision. In that moment, my heart swelled. I realized that being present didn't always mean sacrificing my own needs. Sometimes, it meant simply allowing space for love to flow, like the colors of beads stringing together into something beautiful. As the afternoon wore on, the rain transitioned from a gentle sprinkle to a full downpour, and with the sound of rain drumming against the roof, we retreated to the kitchen, a familiar laughter mixing with the aroma of cookies baking in the oven. I knew I had nothing planned beyond the two of them being there, and as I gathered the ingredients, flour, sugar, chocolate chips, and an old, well-loved mixing bowl, I felt a surge of happiness. A quiet sense of belonging washed over me, and I couldn't help but think that this was precisely how connections could mend, through shared experiences, laughter, and the simplicity of being together. Later, as we sat around the table, cookies cooling on a rack, I felt a sudden need to express my vulnerability to Emily. I took a breath, my hands enveloping the warm mug once more, and spoke about that lingering guilt, the part of me that worried I'd never be reliable enough. I confess that while I loved them both dearly, I sometimes felt like I was failing at being a sister and an aunt. Emily listened, her brow furrowing slightly, the afternoon light casting gentle shadows across her face. When I finished, a weight lifted, revealing a tender side of our relationship, the understanding that came from sharing. "Hey," she said softly, "we're both learning as we go. I don't expect you to be my safety net, and I'm sorry if I've ever put that pressure on you." Her words washed over me, a balm to my soul. In the days that followed, our bond deepened. Further. From impromptu movie nights to phone calls that stretched late into the night fueled by wine and laughter, I noticed a shift. The overwhelming fear of inadequacy loosened its grip on me, revealing an openness that allowed us both to express our needs without fear of judgment. It was liberating, a dance under the stars of empathy, where we both hesitated and stumbled yet continued to step in time. When Emily called one day, her voice edged with excitement, I hadn't expected her to ask for my help more intentionally. "I have a conference next week, and I need someone to watch Mia, would you consider it?" I felt a surge of panic at the thought of being responsible for a child, but then I remembered how far we'd come. "I'd love to," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The birth of that new chapter in our sibling relationship transformed the tension into anticipation. The day arrived, and I found myself preparing my modest apartment for Mia with the fervor of a holiday preparation. I can still hear the muffled sound of her laughter echoing down the hallway when she arrived, her tiny shoes squeaking against the floor bringing a warmth to my heart. For the next 2 days, our lives became one joyous whirlwind of crayons, storybooks, and creative messes, reminding me that while I may not have been the most traditional caretaker, I could still be present, still be significant. On the last evening of her stay, Mia and I found ourselves on the floor, surrounded by a halo of half-finished drawings and toys. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes wide with wonder, and asked, "Can we stay like this forever?" Her innocence stung my heart, a reminder of the fleeting nature of childhood innocence. Embracing her just for that moment seemed like a promise to always be a part of her life. Once Emily returned, her face carried both weariness and joy, and when she saw the chaos of toys scattered around, she raised an eyebrow playfully. "Did you survive?" I laughed, realizing that the laughter woven through those brief days had created a tapestry of memories neither of us could have anticipated. That feeling of warmth swelled again as Mia clung to my legs, reluctant to leave, and her pleas were enough to keep my spirits high. As I waved them goodbye, a sense of bittersweet nostalgia settled over me. I thought of that earlier text, a digital reminder of acceptance, and I embraced the space we'd created together. Our labyrinth was no longer just filled with turns and obstacles but rich with color, unspoken love, and the assurance that we were both persistent travelers, constantly rediscovering each other, one cookie and laughter-filled day at a time. And with every twist, every pause we took, I understood that we weren't just making it through, we were crafting the story of us, a story worth telling for years to come. Every night, without fail, the air would grow thick with a heavy silence at precisely 10:52 p.m., as if the world had pressed pause on itself. Living in a small town like Brookshire, this unnerving ritual was an accepted part of life, a peculiar tradition that I had come to know for as long as I could remember. I would watch the clock tick down from my bedroom window, the cool moonlight casting long shadows across my floor, the only sound being the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. It was strange, really, how nobody ever spoke about it, not even in whispers. My parents never bothered to explain why every household, every shop, and even the streetlights would dim or flicker for 12 minutes each night, as if the entire town was collectively holding its breath. I often found myself puzzled, torn between my curiosity and an inexplicable instinct to just let it be, to let it weave itself into the fabric of my life like a long-held family secret. But that fateful summer night, curiosity won, fueled by a restless spirit and an idea that maybe, just maybe, I could peek behind the curtain of this nightly mystery that had haunted me. As I stitched together my plan, the thrill of uncovering a long-buried secret coursed through me like electricity, making my heart race with each passing second toward midnight. Armed with a flashlight and an insatiable need for answers, I slipped out of my room, careful not to disturb my sleeping parents. I stepped onto the cobblestone street, the night air crisp against my skin as I ventured down my familiar lane. I felt the familiar thrill of danger tingling along my spine, but I was fueled by purpose now. My best friend Jacob had always said that fear itself was just an illusion, a construct of the mind to keep us inside neatly wrapped boxes. Tonight, I was stepping out of mine, determined to find out what happened when the clock struck 11. As I approached the town square, I noticed the stillness, the shops darkened and locked, the park benches empty under the blanket of night. My pulse quickened. I had never been this close to the heart of the town during a lockdown. At 10:58, I ducked behind a large oak tree, its gnarled branches dipping low like bent old men in conversation. I could see the glow of the clock tower illuminating the street in soft gold, casting everything in a surreal haze. Then, suddenly, at 10:59, a wave of tension swept through the air, and the familiar flickering began. The town inhaled deeply, and I felt the breath of it rush past me, a wild wind rising but with no sound to accompany it. At 11 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. I held my breath, straining to see beyond the shadows where the flickering flickered out entirely, leaving only the oppressive darkness draping over Brookshire. My flashlight's beam seemed feeble in comparison as I scanned my surroundings. Then I saw them, figures emerging slowly from every corner, gathering under the clock tower, their silhouettes merging and morphing into one another like the whispers of ghosts in the night. It was then that I realized the truth of the lockdown. They weren't ordinary townsfolk. They were different. They moved with a deliberate grace that sent chills running down my spine. As I stared in wide-eyed awe, I recognized familiar faces amongst the crowd, my neighbors, the shop owners, even the mailman, yet they wore strange expressions, devoid of any feeling I had ever associated with them. They seemed entranced, their eyes glossed over as they collectively shifted in rhythm, their bodies swaying as if conducting an invisible orchestra. I instinctively backed away, heart pounding in my ears, when I bumped into something solid, a single figure cloaked in dark fabric, its features obscured. I opened my mouth to scream, but panic paralyzed me, turning my voice to stone. That's when the figure leaned closer, a voice like gravel whispering, "If you want to know the truth, you must listen." The world around me melted into whispers, their secrets flying through the air, weaving tales of ancient pacts and sacrifices made to protect the town from the darkness beyond the edge of our small universe. Each night served as a mechanism of renewal, a moment to reinforce the bond between the town and whatever lurked outside our perimeter, a reminder of the fear that kept us all safe. Each of the 12 minutes before midnight allowed the townsfolk to offer up their fears, their regrets, to the void beyond. They would carry the weight of it while, for 12 minutes, Brookshire reclaimed its peace. As the clock struck 11 and the shadows began to disperse, everything settled into an eerie tranquility. I felt the oppressive weight of understanding settle over me like a shroud. I had learned something no one else had spoken aloud, a truth that forced me to see my home in a startling new light. I slipped away, my heart racing as I retraced my steps in the quiet night. By the time I was safely back in my room, shame washed over me. I realized that in seeking the truth, I had stepped away from the comforting lies that had woven the town together. I lay awake long after the clock had chimed again, the town clutching its secrets tight. What would I do with this knowledge? That night, for the first time, I understood the weight of my neighbor's silent burdens, and the following days felt different. I walked the streets of Brookshire with a growing sense of unease, unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong, and yet so very right about the ritual that I had once found absurd. The updates to my daily life became riddled with reminders of that fateful night, the slight nods from shopkeepers, the knowing smiles from those who had participated willingly, and in those moments, I grappled with the choice between ignorance and understanding. Months passed, and though I hadn't shared this experience with a single soul, I noticed the town changing subtly. The conversations felt deeper, the laughter more genuine, as if we were all carrying the weight of knowledge with us. I pondered often, should I tell someone? Could sharing do more harm than good? In the end, I decided it was wisdom best left as a quiet companion, a ghost story of sorts, a tale that shaped my framework of perception about our collective existence and the invisible lines we draw to stay safe, because perhaps not all knowledge is meant to comfort. And each night, as the clock struck 10:52 and the town would lock down, I would breathe deep, thanking the universe for the moment I had taken a leap beyond the known, and into the deeper layers of what life in Brookshire truly meant. As the clock struck 10:52 every night, a sense of calm and acceptance settled over me, a warm blanket in the chilly embrace of the unknown. The routine had become an intricate part of my life in Brookshire, a place that often felt like a quaint postcard from the past, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Yet, as the siren wailed and the town fell silent around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was perched upon the edge of a precipice, gazing down into shadows that danced just out of sight. The first time I had experienced the lockdown, the eerie stillness that enveloped the streets, had been surreal. I was at a late-night study session with friends, the weight of midterms hanging heavy, our laughter spilling into the soft glow of the cafe's neon lights. Suddenly, the cheerful chatter was silenced by that haunting wail, and the cafe owner, a man with kindly eyes and a perpetual smile, turned off the main lights. "Don't worry, it will be over in just 12 minutes, he assured us, but the way his voice trembled slightly as he said it sent a chill down my spine. That first evening, curiosity gnawed at me. What could possibly happen during those 12 minutes that required our town to lock down every night? I began to dig deeper, asking friends and neighbors, weaving through rumors and anecdotes, a silent detective with no plan beyond satiating my curiosity. Most, it seemed, had long since accepted the routine. It was a part of life in Brookshire, whispered about but never dissected. Still, I was undeterred, driven by an insatiable urge to uncover the truth, to reveal the hidden stories tucked between the seams of our town's fabric. Nights turned into weeks, and I collected stories that spoke of strange occurrences, muffled sounds echoing through the air, flickering lights, and sometimes, faint reflections in the windows that vanished when looked upon directly. But no one ever spoke about what lay behind those 12 minutes. Perhaps I was foolish, but I felt a peculiar sense of connection to whatever secret lingered in the shadows. It wasn't until one fateful night that I stumbled upon an old journal hidden in the attic of my grandmother's long-abandoned house. The journal belonged to a distant relative, a woman who had been deemed an outsider in our town decades ago, a name whispered with a mix of reverence and fear. As I flipped through its fragile pages, I felt her despair, her isolation echoing through the years. She wrote of a darkness that had encroached upon Brookshire, a darkness that could not be spoken of openly yet haunted the town's collective memory. Her words were cryptic, but they painted a chilling picture of the past, filled with a sense of foreboding that mirrored my unease. Each passage spoke of the loud sirens, a warning of sorts, summoning the townsfolk to protect themselves from what lay beyond the safety of their homes. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized this journal, once a neglected artifact, now pulsed with urgency, as if the weight of history was begging for acknowledgement. The next evening, I felt compelled to share everything I had learned with the town council. A handful of reluctant faces gathered in the community hall. I presented my findings, my heart racing with the fear of rejection, of being branded the town's nouveau conspiracy theorist. Surprisingly, a gentle murmur rolled through the room. People shifted uneasily in their seats but listened. It was then that Mrs. Haddock, my high school history teacher now with silver streaks winding through her hair, spoke up, her voice a soft echo against the walls. The lockdowns were initially a precaution, she admitted, back when strange things began happening, children going missing, strange lights in the woods. We created protocols, trying to keep fear at bay. The air thickened with unsaid words, the fear we'd all been harboring surged to the surface. It became clear, amid the muted gasps and shifting murmurs, that we had all felt the tremors of something lurking, something unwelcome, and in trying to shield our community, we had silenced the very whispers that could have liberated us. Afterward, a woman approached me, her eyes weary. "My daughter went missing during the lockdown 3 years ago," she confessed, voice trembling. "I just thought it was all a coincidence, a sad part of life, but it was never discussed. All we did was follow orders." In that moment, I felt the weight of the town's collective guilt, a shared complicity in shielding ourselves from the dark while allowing it to infiltrate our lives through silence. I understood, finally, that the knowledge we held wasn't just a burden, it was a catalyst for change. Over the following weeks, I wrote to each of my neighbors, shared stories, opened channels of communication, and we began to speak, not in fear, but with hope. The 12 minutes became a platform for healing. We marked that time by uniting, creating rituals of remembrance for the lost, a declaration that we would not let history repeat itself. It was empowering to reclaim our narrative, to turn shadows into light, and slowly, the sirens transformed from dreadful reminders into signals of resilience. I began to realize that, sometimes, tearing down the walls we build was necessary, not just for our peace of mind but for the collective heart of a town that had been silenced too long. And as night fell and the sirens rang true, I joined my neighbors on the front porch, sharing our stories, reclaiming our past, and building a future free from the chains of dark whispers. The fear transformed into a gentle solidarity, as recognition settled in. That night, as the clock struck 10:52, I took a deep breath, allowing gratitude to wash over me, not just for the truth revealed, but for each soul that dared to be vulnerable, to share a story, to embrace the discomfort that eventually led to our coming together. Little did I realize that this was just the beginning. The nights that followed unfolded with a surprising cadence of trust and connection. Every 10:52 brought with it not just the sound of the sirens marking the lockdown, but the unmistakable sense of unity that had been forged in our shared vulnerability. Each evening, more families joined us on the porch, stories flowing like warm honey, sticky and sweet, their narratives intertwining with one another, creating a tapestry of lives colored by hardship, resilience, and kinship. We spoke of old neighbors long forgotten, of the eccentricities that once defined our small town, and of the chilling events that led to our customs, each revelation a thread pulling tighter around our community, stitching the fabric of Brookshire back together. I discovered Mrs. Thompson had once been a gifted violinist, performing with a local symphony before the lockdown enforced her seclusion, and I encouraged her to play once again. The mournful notes she produced carried a haunting beauty that seemed to echo our past sorrows while beckoning hope towards the future. But it wasn't only the adults who found their voices, even the children, who had previously been hushed by the fatigue of our town's rumors, began to share their dreams and fear, whispers of monsters under their beds emerging lightheartedly transformed into shadows of the unknown that haunted us all. As the days slipped by, I watched the essence of Brookshire metamorphose. The self-imposed barriers that once shackled us fell away, replaced by a sense of belonging that filled the gaps of our lives. Neighbors ventured away from their homes after the lockdowns were lifted, engaging in spontaneous community events. I found myself enveloped in this whirlwind of rekindled friendship, revitalizing not just our town but also my sense of purpose. One chilly evening, after another night of storytelling, we decided to shift the lockdown. Rather than retreating behind closed doors at 10:52, we would share a meal, a simple gathering to acknowledge the passage of time and the strength we had collectively developed. So Friday became our unity night. Candles flickered on tables sprawled end to end across Main Street, laughter mingled with the lingering silence of the sirens that would still wail, serving as a reminder of what we once faced, but also of how far we had come. However, as the weeks rolled into months, I started to feel a peculiar tug at my heart, a flutter of unresolved tension that I couldn't quite place. Every so often, I'd catch fleeting glances of unease hidden beneath the smiles shared over meals. I noticed that each night, some families still chose to stay behind locked doors, as if they held fast to an instinct that warned them not to fully embrace this newfound peace. One night, a particularly fierce storm battered Brookshire, and the sirens howled through the air, mirroring the thunder above. The lights flickered, and after a moment of hesitation, our gathering dispersed, people reluctant but ultimately retreating to the safety of their homes. Little did I know, as I settled into bed that evening, that my fleeting concerns were about to crystallize into something far more real. The next morning, just before dawn's light began to spill across the horizon, a frantic knock on my door jolted me awake. It was Mr. Holloway, the town's old librarian, who looked pale and shaken. He gasped for breath, his voice barely above a whisper as he beckoned me outside. "It's happening again," he said, "you have to see." We hurried down the street, following the shadows of our neighbors emerging from their homes, all us drawn together by a mutual fear. The streets of Brookshire felt like a haunted morning, mournful and heavy. As I stepped outside, the atmosphere shimmered with something otherworldly. Our community gathered at the center of town in wide-eyed confusion, murmurs of disbelief echoing the early mist. Then it came, a sudden and powerful shift in the air as a figure appeared at the edge of Ellis Park, bathed in the gray light of dawn. It was an old woman, her face weathered with lines wrapping around cautious blue eyes, an aura that tugged at something deep within me. In her hands, she held what appeared to be a large, brightly painted box adorned with swirling designs reminiscent of the stories we had been sharing. "When the townsfolk forget the darkness that comes after the lockdowns," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady amidst the tension, "the darkness will remind them." A chill pierced the air as she opened the box to reveal strings of delicate memories, old photographs, crumpled letters, and fragments of forgotten lives, pieces of Brookshire long lost and nearly erased from our minds. They danced and flickered in the wind, releasing a wave of whispered voices that echoed through the town, triggering every locked memory of pain, neglect, and fears we had tried to bury. As I watched in horror and fascination, I could feel the energy of the past surging through the crowd, feeding off each individual's shame, guilt, and curiosity for the life they once lived. What does this mean? I wondered, my heart racing between dread and the need for answers. The woman's eyes met mine, and for a moment, the fear evaporated. She offered a knowing smile. "Embrace it," she urged, "and decide for yourselves how to let it shape you." At that moment, I understood what had happened during those surreal nights of sharing. We had built something beautiful in the wake of darkness, a new tradition where vulnerability turned into strength. However, the stories we buried were still there, existing in the fabric of our town, yearning to be recognized. We could no longer lock down our fears nor ignore the consequences of our past. We united not just in declaring our old pain but in acknowledging it together. And so we did. In our newfound circle of acceptance and resilience, we began to share once more. The fears and sadness would not diminish our light, instead, they would guide us towards growth. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the town of Brookshire stood together, brilliant and renewed, prepared to embrace whatever lay ahead while carrying every piece of who we were beneath our shared story. The box of memories became a symbol, reminding us that while we may lock down at twilight, it was the unlocking in the light of day that truly defined our existence. It was a quiet evening when I sat down at my kitchen table, the faint smell of roasted vegetables still clinging to the air, a comforting reminder of the dinner I had enjoyed alone after a long day. I was scrolling through my phone when a message from an acquaintance, Anna, popped up, asking if she could come over for a casual get-together. My fingers hesitated over the screen, thoughts racing back to a party last month where Anna, with her bright smile and bubbly personality, made a bombastic introduction that was quickly overshadowed by her confession. She referred to herself as a total klepto. At the time, I had chuckled along with the other guests, brushing it off as a quirky exaggeration, but her subsequent actions raised hair on my neck. I watched, uneasy, as she slipped a bottle of wine into her bag and, just before leaving, rifled through my collection of vintage postcards while distracted by conversation. I knew I should have said something then, it would have been a golden opportunity for a teachable moment, but the laughter of friends masked my instincts as I let it slide. Now, as I read her message, I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I typed a hesitant response, explaining that I had plans for the weekend and wouldn't be able to host her. Each word felt like a half-truth, a feeble wall I was trying to erect against an uninvited chaos. After sending it, I sank into an uneasy silence, replaying the moment she had look of glee when she thought no one was watching, a sort of childlike delight in taking things that weren't hers. The truth was, I didn't want that kind of energy in my home, a space I had worked hard to make a sanctuary. I loved the little treasures I had collected over the years, the mismatched teacups, the faded photographs, and the mere idea of them being subject to her klepto nature made me shudder. Days passed after my refusal, but the unease lingered like an unwelcoming guest. Our mutual friends began to ask about my decision. They wanted to know why I hadn't invited Anna, often couching their questions in a concern that felt almost mocking, as if I were the unreasonable one who had denied a friend simple hospitality. "It's just a joke, you know?" one of them remarked, laughter dancing at the edges of his voice as we stood by a fruity punch bowl. "You can't take it seriously." But I couldn't shake off the feeling. I started to wonder if I was being a bit too harsh, a bit too closed off, yet I felt the sting of their laughter in a way that didn't match my situation. Then came a text I hadn't anticipated. Anna reached out to me again, this time apologizing for her past behavior and inviting me to discuss it over coffee. A part of me wanted to engage, to hear her thoughts and perhaps offer her the understanding I had assumed she lacked. Yet another part remained on guard, caution spilling into the forefront of my mind, warning me of potential manipulation. I chose ambiguity, suggesting that we meet in a public space, something casual, allowing me to maintain the physical distance my heart craved. When the day came, we met in a quaint little cafe, the air thick with the smell of freshly baked pastries. Anna walked in, her demeanor had shifted, the confidence seemed tempered by uncertainty, her usual flamboyance stripped down to a fragile humility. She ordered a latte, and as our small talk veered into deeper waters, I found myself listening intently, her eyes pleading for comprehension, her remorse tinged with vulnerability. She spoke of her addiction, her battles with impulse control, her admission that the label klepto was more of a coping mechanism than a joke. I felt my own walls begin to crack, an understanding blossoming within the fissures of my guarded heart. It became evident that her light-hearted banter often masked a turbulent history, a story that I hadn't anticipated digging beneath the surface. I left that meeting not with a resolution but with a renewed sense of compassion toward someone I had judged too quickly. Maybe I wasn't the asshole after all, but perhaps I was merely wrapped in the confines of my own fears. Eventually, as I navigated my way through my own thoughts, I decided to reach out again. I recorded a message for Anna, saying I'd like to try again, inviting her for a small gathering with a few close friends. It felt right, a balance of caution and empathy, a tentative step toward bridging the space I had drawn between us. Several weeks later, I would look back at that moment of choosing to create a connection rather than a rift. I realized something profound about people. We are all carrying unseeable burdens, and sometimes, understanding is the most potent remedy we can offer. Update: a few months have passed since our reconnection, and Anna has slowly proven herself to be a dear friend, one who respects my space and has taken steps toward managing her impulses. She even surprised me at my birthday party with a thoughtful, hand-picked gift from my favorite bookstore, something I never would have thought possible when the conversation first unfolded in that cafe. As it turns out, both our experiences shaped a new port of calm in the stormy seas of uncertainty. It had reminded me that sometimes the most unsettling moments can lead to the strongest of bonds. As I reflect on the months that have passed since that pivotal decision, I can't help but marvel at how far Anna and I have come. There was a time when the thought of letting her into my life again felt risky, as if I were teetering on the edge of a cliff. It was easy to envision scenarios where her past tendencies would rear their heads, leading to a cascade of mistrust and awkward moments. However, I've come to understand that letting her in required a vulnerability I hadn't expected to offer, not just to her, but to myself. With each casual meeting, be it over coffee at our favorite little cafe or an impromptu movie night at my place, I noticed the subtle shifts. In our conversations, the laughter now echoed with a reserved familiarity rather than tension and caution. Anna sincerely worked on herself, eagerly sharing her progress and the strategies she was implementing to curb her impulses. Each time she showed up with a new accomplishment or insight, my heart melted just a bit more, swelling with awe for her courage and determination to change. One evening, as we curled up on my couch with blankets piled high and an array of snacks scattered around like a makeshift feast, our laughter filled the room, mingling seamlessly with the soft glow of the lamp casting golden shadows on the walls. It felt like home in a way I had nearly forgotten, a sanctuary where two people could be honest about their flaws without fear of judgment. I remember teasing her about her initial tendency to swipe something, a fine-looking postcard or a quirky pen, when she got overly excited. She playfully rolled her eyes, recounting a story about a time she had unintentionally taken an unusual clay figurine from a friend's house, only to return it a few days later, embarrassed and ashamed. We both laughed, and it struck me how that shared moment of vulnerability forged an even stronger connection. Her self-awareness illuminated a warmth in my heart. It was during one of those cozy evenings that I proposed we visit her old neighborhood, the neighborhood she had grown up in, just to see how things had changed. To my surprise, she agreed. As we strolled through the familiar streets, Anna pointed out buildings and shops, relaying stories from her childhood that were both endearing and bittersweet. There was a sense of nostalgia that enveloped us, and I could feel a deeper understanding blooming between us as we walked under the fluttering leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks. Anna spoke vividly about her dreams and aspirations, the very ones that had often been stifled by her earlier behavior, and in that moment, I glimpsed a new layer of her, the possibility of uncharted horizons, a future reshaped by newfound accountability. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Just last week, while I was out running errands, I received a frantic text from Anna, sharing how she had just been at a local busy store and felt drawn in by the rush of excitement, a familiar tension brewing within her. I could sense her panic through the screen as she admitted having slipped a decorative mug into her bag, her heart racing as she navigated the ethics of her actions in real time. My stomach twisted, I felt a flash of empathy mixed with fear. Part of me worried, was this my fault for encouraging her too much too quickly? Only moments passed before my phone buzzed again, and I read her message thanking me for being there. She confessed that when she reached her car, panic bubbled up inside her, urging her to overcome the old impulse, yet this time she chose differently. She pressed her palm against the mug, emerging as the person she aspired to be, her pulse steadying as she marched back inside to return it. I felt endless pride for her courage, and it served as a pivotal reminder of why I let her back into my life. Now, as I sit here reflecting on our journey, I realize how beautifully intertwined our lives have become. While Anna may carry the label of a total klepto in moments of levity, she is so much more than that one chapter. She is a testament to resilience, transforming an unsettling part of her identity into a space of growth and self-awareness. And who she is now, the person she has become, inspires kindness and connection in ways I genuinely didn't believe possible. Perhaps in forging a connection based on our mutual struggles, we inadvertently carved out a bond that scaffolded our souls in the chaos of living. As I look ahead, I can't help but feel curiosity for what lies down this uncharted path for us. Whatever it may be, together, we are embracing it. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting often on that crisp autumn day when Anna sat across from me in the little cafe, her admission hanging in the air like a caustic perfume. I had braced myself for the storm that conversation could have unleashed, but instead, it had gently nudged open the door to an unexpected friendship. One chilly evening, as golden leaves swirled around outside my window, Anna and I sat curled up in my living room, a stack of books scattered between us, the soft glow of fairy lights illuminating the cozy space. We were laughing about our most recent adventure, her brave decision to swap out her usual baked goods for fruit and nuts at a local market, a small victory in her ongoing journey of self-regulation. Each jest carried the weight of our shared laughter and love, a testament to how far she had come since our initial meeting. I watched her, marveling at the way her eyes sparkled with pride at her choices, something I often found myself nurturing in her as she shared anecdotes about her past mishaps. It was strange to think that just months prior, I had been wary of her presence, needing to protect my own space from the chaos of her admitted kleptomania. Yet here we were, two souls in tandem, navigating the bumps of our own imperfections. In the quiet moments, I could feel vulnerability wrap around us like a warm blanket, stitching together the tearing seams of our uncertainties. We talked about the moments that had defined us, her experiences reflected in mine, and it became clear that both of us had worn masks before finally discovering a safe haven in each other. There were still echoes of the past, rumblings beneath the surface that reminded us of our journeys. Sometimes, I would catch a flicker of darkness clouding her face, a shadow of temptation that whispered if only it could persuade her just once more. But instead of fear, I felt a rush of empathy swell inside me. I had seen her taking strides, how she carried around little reminders of her commitment, like a bracelet that she fidgeted with during tense moments, a grounding anchor amid her chaotic thoughts. These days, her voices of the past had transformed from torturous howls into whispered echoes of encouragement. We had both come to recognize that acceptance doesn't mean surrendering to our flaws, but rather, learning to dance with them amid the music of life, struggling less against the rhythm and finding our own beat. With every passing day, curiosity about our future mingled with uncertainty, a blend of excitement and trepidation that accompanied me whenever I thought of where this connection might lead. We began exploring new hobbies together, pottery classes that left our hands muddied yet creative, bookshop visits where conversations would tumble into the air like soft whispers. Each activity strengthened our bond, and it became increasingly hard to imagine my life without Anna's infectious laughter. One balmy winter evening, as we sat close in front of the flickering fireplace, our shared warmth seemed to wrap around us like the flames dancing in the hearth. Anna turned to me, her voice quiet but steady. "You know, I've learned so much from you, not to be afraid of the messy parts of our lives." I found that I had learned just as much from her, how authentic friendships could coax us out of our hidden corners and inspire bravery where we once only felt fear. It was then I realized what we were building together was not simply companionship, it felt like crafting a safe haven, a gathering point for two afraid hearts trying to rewrite their narratives. Still, as thoughts of what lay ahead lingered in the back of my mind, I understood that even within this sea of calm, the tides could shift with the slightest change. Our bond felt strong, almost etched in stone, yet challenges were part of life's intricate design, woven delicately into each sunset. As I nestled deeper into the warmth of our moments like these, I recognized that every twist in this journey would further color our story, each chapter rich with experience, growth, and perhaps an occasional storm. Yet through the tempest, I felt a newfound certainty that, no matter what, Anna and I were committed to weathering it together, brave enough to embrace whatever was waiting around the corner. It's funny how a seemingly small, mundane moment can spiral into something significant in your life. I never thought tossing out a pillow would lead me to question the very fabric of my marriage. My name is Ethan, and I've been happily married to my wife, Lily, for nearly 6 years. We have those comfortable, cozy routines, the shared cups of coffee on a Sunday morning, evening walks after dinner, and the predictable rhythm of our lives together. But lately, there was something about our shared space that had begun to grate on my nerves, particularly one fluffy, lavender-colored pillow that we kept on our bed, a gift from her grandmother. I should probably mention that it was one of those pillows that carried a constant, overwhelming scent of lavender, almost sickening at times, masking the sense of my own comforting cologne that lingered in the air. At first, it was just a quirky part of our home, but over the months, its presence turned from soothing to suffocating, especially as we prepared for a week-long family stay. I could feel my irritation bubbling beneath the surface whenever I caught sight of it. It was always there, like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. The night before her family was set to arrive, I found myself tossing and turning, the pillow's scent invading my dreams, wrapping me like a shroud. At 2 a.m, exhausted and desperate, I finally snapped. I can still vividly recall the sensation of the pillow softening in my grip as I carried it down the hallway, heart racing, my mind flooded with conflicting emotions. I felt both reckless and relieved as I swung open the door to the storage room, a small space filled with boxes and old mementos, and pitched the pillow in. It sank into the darkness like a weight off my shoulders, and I felt a jolt of sick satisfaction. I spent the next few hours in a haze of guilt and triumph, thinking about everything else I could say about our relationship, but instead, her family arrived the next morning, and Lily hadn't even noticed her pillow was gone in the chaos of greeting them. But here's where things get tricky. As the day went on, I could see the tiniest hints of concern flickering in her expression. She searched our bedroom, rifling through drawers and shrugging off the chatter of her family, who were blissfully unaware of the mounting tension. I felt that gnawing sense of unease, the kind that creeps into the bathroom mirror when you stand alone, staring at your reflection, questioning your most recent choices. When she finally confronted me, not long after dinner, her eyes were wide, searching for reassurance in my expression. "Have you seen my lavender pillow?" The question, innocent yet loaded, hung in the air between us. I hesitated but ultimately confessed, feeling the flush of shame creeping up my neck. Her silence was deafening, the confusion morphing into something sharper. Instead of comfort, I had thrown away a part of her history, a small piece of her family. And I could see the quiet devastation etched in the lines of her face. Our subsequent conversation was heavy with emotion. I could sense the spiral of hurt in her voice, revealing how that pillow had connected her to memories of her childhood, evenings spent reading on her bed, and the warmth of her grandmother's embrace. My heart sank deeper with each story she shared, a gentle reminder that sometimes love can be tangled within the tiniest details of our lives. I apologized repeatedly, feeling utterly foolish for treating her cherished memory so carelessly. We stayed up late that night, navigating through laughter and tears, acknowledging the fragility of our emotions. I never imagined that a pillow could spark such vulnerability, forcing us to confront things we often take for granted. After we reached an understanding, we decided together to continue looking for that pillow, even if it meant rummaging through the heap of nostalgia and dust lurking in that storied room. The tension eased slowly, like steam from a boiling kettle, and I found peace in the act of searching for it together. It was a journey that brought us closer, reaffirming our commitment despite the initial bump in the road. Eventually, we unearthed the pillow, still rich with its lavender scent and the remnants of a once frayed. We laughed as I improvised a half-hearted excuse about its coziness and discarded it into another box, recognizing its significance but opting for a new beginning instead. In the weeks that followed, I realized that sometimes, it's the little things that matter most and remind us we're a part of something larger. Our relationships are built on layers of memories, some heavy and some light, but all woven together in unexpected ways. And even now, whenever that scent wafts through the room, it's a reminder not just of a pillow or a memory, but how heartfelt confrontation and vulnerability can mend things we didn't even realize were breaking. Update: a few months later, I stumbled upon a similar lavender pillow during a visit to a local store, and it stirred something unexpected inside me. With a gentle hesitation, I decided to buy it and, upon presenting it to Lily with a hesitant smile, I felt the warmth return to our bedroom. She took one look at it and burst into laughter, realizing the full circle nature of our pillow saga. The new lavender pillow graced our bed, not merely as an item of comfort but as a reminder of our journey, and now, whenever I catch a whiff of it in the air, I smile at how such a simple object can hold the weight of love and understanding. As the days progressed, the lavender pillow became more than just a comfort item. It seemed to weave itself into the fabric of our daily lives, an unspoken vow that we had made to each other to communicate openly and to embrace quirks, whether they be mine or Lily's. I found myself taking more time to appreciate the little moments we shared. Each evening, as we slid into bed, I noticed how the soft texture of the new pillow cradled our heads just right, its soothing scent enveloping us both in an atmosphere that fostered intimacy and warmth. One night, I turned to Lily, illuminated by the soft glow of our bedside lamp, and found her lost in thought, her fingers gently tracing the new pillow's edge. It seemed as if she was contemplating the journey we had just traversed. I asked her what was on her mind, and after a moment's pause, she admitted that she had been reflecting on how our pillow saga had inadvertently highlighted deeper truths about our relationship, how our unique little battles often revealed the ways we could grow together. She smiled then, that beautiful, sincere smile that lit up her eyes, and I felt a wave of fondness wash over me. We began to share stories from our past, laughing at the silly, stubborn moments we'd both experienced in our previous relationships, even during awkward shopping trips where preferences clashed like magnets with different polarities. Each anecdote drew us closer. I was reminded of how important it is to embrace and accept those differences, rather than let them fester into something that could harm the bond we nurtured. Days turned into weeks, and soon the pillow became a staple in our routine. It was a silent witness to our late-night conversations, whispered secrets, and gentle arguments over whose turn it was to choose a movie. We found harmony not only in our togetherness, but also in the acceptance of our divergences. The lavender aroma became a soothing constant in our home, an aromatic thread that knitted us closer every day. Yet, like all relationships navigating their intricate paths, we did stumble upon a moment of disquietude. One stormy evening, I returned home to find the light from our kitchen casting a warm glow through the window, a familiar sight that usually warmed my heart, yet on this particular night, something felt off. As I stepped inside, I noticed the electric tension in the air. Lily was seated at the kitchen table, her gaze fixed on the window, and I could see her shoulders slightly tense as I approached. Her silence spoke volumes. She seemed deep in thought, but frustration simmered just beneath the surface. I sat down across from her, the storm outside mirroring the brewing conflict between us. "What's wrong?" I asked gently, as I reached across to touch her hand. She pulled her fingers away, an act that stung unexpectedly, making my heart race with anxiety. "It's just. Sometimes, I feel like you still don't really get it, you know?" Her words hung heavily in the air. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, unsure of how to respond, but I pressed on. We spent hours unraveling our feelings, with the lavender pillow silently softening the edges of our tumultuous discussion. It was during that exchange that I realized how vital it was to keep the channels of communication open. My fear of conflict had often led me to be passive, while Lily's sensitivity to every little slight sometimes made her seem unyielding. Together we acknowledged the growing pains that had followed us from relationship to relationship. I wanted to assure her that I was committed to understanding her emotions, but my own insecurities struggled to surface amidst the haze of tension. We finally stood on a precipice. Either side could lead to deeper understanding or further resentment. After a long, watchful silence, I finally pulled the lavender pillow close to me and smiled weakly. "Maybe this pillow has more lessons for us than we thought," I said, chuckling softly, trying to diffuse the tension. Lily snorted in response, breaking the heaviness that had wrapped around us like a fog. As the laughter bubbled between us, we recognized the absurdity of letting such small misunderstandings amplify into something bigger. Our hearts lightened, and the glow in the room shifted. We promised to keep talking, to share our feelings no matter how uncomfortable they felt. With that, we drew together, the lavender pillow positioned as a bridge rather than a barrier. It was at that moment, nestled together in shared vulnerability, that the pillow gained yet another layer of meaning, not just a symbol of comfort, but a reminder of the importance of facing conflict together, wrapped up in love and understanding. There was something powerful in that concession. I couldn't help but feel grateful for the lessons still ahead of us, knowing that through it all, our lavender pillow would remain steadfast, soaking up the experiences of both laughter and tears, ever present on our journey together, guiding us toward deeper connection. As the days turned into weeks, the lavender pillow transformed from a mere item on our bed into an emblem of our evolving relationship. Each time I settled down at night beside Lily, I could feel the softness of that pillow cradling not just our heads, but our unspoken hopes and vulnerabilities. There were evenings when we discussed everything from work frustrations to dreams for the future, our heads resting upon it as if it were a shared confidant. It seemed like that pillow had the unique ability to diffuse tension, allowing us to speak openly, something we hadn't always done in the past. One particularly cool autumn night, when the leaves outside were swirling in the brisk wind, I decided to surprise her with a small picnic in our living room, laying out a blanket and preparing some of her favorite snacks. The casual atmosphere, punctuated with laughter, created a backdrop that felt almost magical. That evening, we talked more deeply than I had anticipated, delving into the very reasons behind our arguments, our dreams, and what we actually wanted for ourselves as individuals, and for our life together as a couple. It felt liberating, to be so open, and I found myself reflecting on the pillow's role as a catalyst for our newfound honesty. I shared my worries about our future, the concerns that gnawed at me daily, fears of stagnation, and unmet expectations, while she confessed her own feelings of inadequacy, the sometimes suffocating anxiety of living up to the ideal of being the perfect partner. We both laughed at our shared insecurities, realizing that the very things we thought made us incompatible were often the realities we both faced. As the sun dipped below the horizon, our conversation transitioned to lighter topics, such as that ridiculous pillow fight we'd had the week prior and her silly matriarchal instinct that had propelled her to guard her beloved cushions. I could see the glow of affection in her eyes as she recounted the moment she had chased me around the room, the carefree laughter reverberating off the walls, the moments I realized how resilient laughter can be in the face of even the toughest arguments. However, the deeper truth was that we were still learning, still navigating each other's intricate emotional landscapes with tender care. And it wasn't just about us. It became apparent that resolving our conflicts was essential for creating a safe space where our relationship could thrive. A few months later, as winter descended and we bundled up against the chilly winds, I felt a renewed sense of connection building between us. We'd found an equilibrium, largely thanks to that humble lavender pillow, which kept us reminded that love is not just about the easy moments. We often refer back to the day I had tossed the old one, laughing that it was the catalyst for change, a moment that pushed us to confront rather than sweep aside our frustrations. Eventually, the time came to celebrate our anniversary, and I wanted it to be special, a reflection of the journey we had embarked upon together. Little did I know that this night would not only mark our love but also balm old wounds. Preparing an intimate dinner at home, I set the table with the dishes we had shared on our very first date, recreating that familiar sense of nostalgia. After dinner, I surprised her with small gifts that told our story, simple, meaningful tokens that played into our shared history, the book she'd recommended that had remained unread on my shelf, a photograph of us taken on a rainy day when we had huddled under a single umbrella, and of course, another lavender pillow, this one softer than the last. As she unwrapped her final gift, the laughter bubbled up, and in that moment, it was evident that we'd not only survived our challenges but had also learned how to love more authentically. Because it wasn't about the gifts, or the pillows, it was about the memories behind them, the discoveries we had made about who we were, and the promise of learning more together. As I looked into her sparkling eyes, I realized that every pillow, every struggle, every moment was infused with the essence of us, reminders that, just like the lavender, our love could flourish in all seasons, rooted in respect, empathy, and a pinch of humor. It was comforting. It was ours. And I felt utterly ready for whatever the future would bring, knowing that a pillow wouldn't just rest on our bed, but would always be there to soften our disagreements and cradle our dreams together.